Welcome to the Shunned podcast, where we expose religions that use shunning as a tool to control people. Today we have a really cool live recording from my living room. This episode's a little different than most. A listener to the show from Australia named Sherrie actually came to the United States on a trip with her Auntie Bev, and they took time out of their trip to come visit my wife Jenny and I. Sherrie is a pretty freshly out ex-Jehovah's Witness, and Beverly was actually never one of the witnesses, but she was very close to her family, and she always kind of hoped that, maybe one day she could see them leave the cult behind. So I had two mics, and we passed them around the living room, and you'll hear Sherrie and Beverly and myself, and my wife Jenny jumps in too. So stick around after the interview. You're going to hear how the podcast is doing, what next month's episode will be about, and I'm also going to give you some highlights from the Shunned Podcast Facebook group and what's going on in there. In fact, I have a surprise audio from somebody in the group that I'm going to share with you that I think you're going to want to stick around and hear. It's one of the coolest first Christmas stories that I've ever heard. Plus, I'm actually going to go ahead and announce something that you, the listener, can participate in on the show in the future. So be sure to listen all the way through, or you might miss something that you might actually want to be a part of. So this whole episode from start to finish has some unique aspects, and I hope you really enjoy it. So without further ado, let's meet Sherrie and Auntie Bev.
My name is Sherrie. I'm 43 years of age, and I am shunned.
All right. And you were one of Jehovah's Witnesses, right?
Correct.
All right. And so how did you become one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place? How old were you? Were you born in? Or
Born in. So not much choice in the matter there.
Okay. So I know that's the case with many. What was the history there? I mean, how many generations back does it go?
So on my father's side, he was second generation, so that made me third. My mother, she's the only one in her side of the family who was a witness. So second generation on her side.
Okay. If you don't mind me asking, do you have any inkling as to what it was? I'm always fascinated by why people join. So do you have any idea what it was maybe that attracted your mom to it?
Yes, I do. Mum had a fairly traumatic childhood. She was the youngest of four, and her father fell quite ill when she was a little girl. Her brother, one of her older brothers, whom she was particularly close to, was quite unwell mentally, and he committed suicide at a young age, and that deeply impacted on Mum, apart from a myriad of other things that had happened in her childhood. So she was pretty scarred from that, and quite vulnerable as a result.
Yeah.
So very sheltered too. When she was about 19, I believe, where she was working, there was someone who was studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. And it was just when the blue bombshell, The Truth That Leads to Eternal Life, was recently out. And this work colleague of hers was studying that book. And I think they were commenting on things that were happening in the world at the time, the Cuban Missile Crisis and, the typical, the world's so bad. And Mum was making the same comments when this work colleague that was studying told her about what she was learning with Jehovah's Witnesses. Mum's curiosity was piqued. She was given a truth book. She read it in one night, and from that was convinced that she had found answers. One of the biggest things that impacted on her was the resurrection hope, the opportunity of seeing her brother again. That remained for many, many years to be a huge motivation for her to be a witness. It also suited her personality. She's quite she's a determined, when she's made a decision on something, she's very definite. So she can tend to be black or white. She'll be quite decisive once she's made a decision. And that very much fitted very well into the ideology and the culture of the religion.
I think that happens with a lot of people because if you think about it, I mean, how many times did we hear stories of somebody? I think my mom was similar in that she got a book and she read it in one night.
Yes.
Stayed up all night reading this book and just boom, like she was sold. That's all she needed. And I think, when you have people who are victims of trauma and products of that environment, they're looking for something, some sort of certainty, something that they can look forward to fix that problem.
Yeah.
And, your mom had the hope of a resurrection right there, boom, in black and white. And, the scriptures they use and the narrative that they form is something that most people have never heard. So what was it they used to talk about? Tickling the ears of people.
Yes.
That's exactly what they do. They sell them what they want. Yeah. And then boom, they're sold and they're ready to go.
Yeah.
So now we have a special guest on the podcast today. We have Auntie Bev. And I know that you got to see this change happen from afar. So how did it feel? So you see her mom going down this path. What did you think of it as you were watching it?
Well, I was very concerned because my baby sister was a Jehovah's Witness. I didn't even know about the Jehovah's Witnesses at all. And she was going to get married in a Kingdom Hall. I wanted to know if it was legally married in a Kingdom Hall. Because in those days you got married in a church. You didn't get married in a park or anywhere. You just always got married in a church. And she said, yes, it was. And I said, okay, fine. We went to the wedding. But then I was also concerned because it was her birthday. 21st, and I couldn't give her a gift. And as Sherrie said, she was black and white.
Yeah.
And cut me off. I didn't see them for a long time. And then after a period of time, she'd had the children. And they did come down to see me at Greenwell Point, which was lovely. But I still didn't think of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I didn't realise that they didn't really support Christmas that much or anything like that because I hadn't seen them. So they came down and it happened to be around Christmas time. I had my Christmas tree up. And Sherrie said to me as a little girl, Auntie Bev, you're not bad. You've got a Christmas tree. So I sat both Sherrie and Donna down, her sister, and just told her that I have a different religion to her and she's got hers and there's no problem. I'm not a bad lady and just little things like that. I didn't really go over it too much. But then Father Christmas was coming along on the water, on the boat. So I took both girls out and said, look, Father Christmas is coming. Not even thinking I was doing the wrong thing. And the next thing, Lola came out and turned both their heads around and brought them inside. And then I realised I'd made a big mistake with the children. And then I got into trouble with my husband because I did the wrong thing with the girls. So it was catch-22. Anyway, they sort of went home and I still didn't see them for a while after that. But I then did go to the Kingdom Hall with Lola. And whilst I didn't like it, I would sit there and I would sing the hymns and I'd go through the book and go through it and I couldn't understand all the bullshit. I don't know how anybody could actually believe in the shit, to tell you the truth. I couldn't understand it. Why could they be so squashed so much?
Yeah, a lot of control.
Yeah, I just couldn't understand it. And then I went with Sherrie to the Kingdom Hall and I went to different meetings. Not a lot, but a few. But I never caused any problems. I went because I was going with them. It didn't matter what church I was at. It didn't matter where it is. And then I went with Donna. I went to hers as well. One thing that really... before I get to that, I went overseas and I was in Mexico and I bought some beautiful black onyx ornaments. And I gave them to Lola and she gave them straight back. I said, what's wrong? They were gods. I didn't even know they were gods. To me, it was just a little black ornament. So I've still got them at home. So that upset me a bit. And then another time, I bought tickets for her to go and see Jesus Christ Superstar. Can you bloody believe that? Not even thinking that she wouldn't like that. So she didn't go to see that, of course. She gave the ticket to somebody else. So everything I did was wrong.
But that all speaks to the fact that when these changes happen, it impacts the family who's not becoming Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah. And I have to ask you, you've said about how black and white it was, and it seems like it was a very sudden change. So was it, were you warned at any point, or was it as simple as, the birthday happens and boom, no gifts?
That's exactly what happened. Okay. I was not warned. I didn't have any idea. All I knew that she was a Jehovah's Witness. She was getting married, and you didn't do anything. You couldn't do anything for her. It's such
a fast change. It's like sometimes you'll see in the world at large a woman will get involved with a man, and all of a sudden, what's the first thing she does? She starts cutting off her family, and things start changing, and it's just a sign of domestic violence, and it's abuse. And in this situation as well, here you go, right away, boom, cut off the family. Yes. It's black and white. It's so fast and it's so harsh, and it's sad that so many outside people get affected by that person's decision. Yes. So, Sherrie, so we've heard from your aunt. What was it like for you growing up in it? What was the worldview that you had from growing up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses? What did it mean to you?
I've been thinking long and hard about that question to try and say it succinctly. It's not an easy thing to try to describe concisely.
Sure.
And I'm naturally an optimistic person too. I don't like to speak too negatively. So even when I look back at my childhood, I recognise the problems with it. I recognise the trauma and the damage. I know that Mum and Dad did the best they could with the circumstances they had. But overall, I would have to say that it was very strict. Very rule driven, and now I recognise as an adult that there wasn't freedom of expression for a child. You were not free to express who you were. You weren't even able to explore or define who you were. That was defined for you. You had to be what you were told to be. Children are told to be obedient to their parents, and that everything Mum and Dad says is it. And for me, I was a very serious-minded child, and I'd been taught I was the oldest, so I had to set the example for my younger sister, and I felt that very keenly. I tried, when I was at school, wherever I was, I felt that my role was already defined of what I was supposed to be. And the only question was, how well was I going to fulfill that role? I didn't even think that there was any alternative to that. So if you were told at the meetings, you're not to sing the national anthem, you're not to salute the flag, well, that's what you just do. You don't question that. You just toe the line and do that. And if your mum and dad say you need to do something, you just do it. So now I look back and I realise that probably wasn't really healthy. But I don't blame mum and dad for that, because I recognise dad was taught the same thing, for example. I mean, he was raised as a witness as well.
Yeah.
And in a pretty harsh environment too. Mum was so keen to please, so anxious to please, that I could see she fit into that very, not easily. I'm not saying it wasn't without some struggle. So the two of them, I think, they were both young. They were traumatised from their youth as well. They were trying to do the best they could, not knowing, not realising that the same traumas that had been inflicted on them, particularly in Dad's case, were now being inflicted on their children too.
So how did you feel in that situation? You just described very well, what you had to do. as a kid, did you feel that you were stifled in any way, or were you kind of, because I know for myself, there were times where I felt really stifled, and then there were also times where I think to get around the feelings of being stifled, I kind of almost became arrogant, where I was like, well, this doesn't feel right, but I've got the truth, right. And so how did it impact you? How did you feel as a kid going through it?
Pressured.
That's a good word.
Really, really pressured. The level of conformity that you had to have, and not just conformity, but that you need to be exemplary. You need to show everyone the way of how you're being loyal to Jehovah and what you're doing. So there was just an enormous amount of pressure. And I know the rest of the family felt that too. As a small example, after each district convention, there'd be, well, not so much these days, but back in the day, new releases.
Yeah.
Right? And with the new releases, I particularly remember from the ages of 9, 10, 11, Mum would help me work out a little demonstration, or a little presentation rather, that I could take to the teachers at school so that I could place a book. And I remember feeling the pressure of doing that. Mum put a lot of effort into helping me work out what to say. And then I remember the days going to school afterwards of, I've got to deliver, I have to do this I have to place a book with this teacher. And there was no other witness in school. It was just me. And it was really hard. That's not what a 9-year-old feels like doing. Is in essence, even at that age, I felt uncomfortable with taking a religious piece of material to a teacher and placing it. And I realized teachers were just being really kind to me.
Oh,
maybe
course.
They saw my nervousness and they just took the book. And yes, I went home all excited. I placed a book, and then I could write it on my report card and hand that in. But if you ask for a feeling that captures my childhood, pressure, I think, is probably the best word I could come up with.
Yeah, I think that's a very good term that we all felt. A lot of pressure. So you felt so much pressure as a kid. How did that manifest? Let's say at home. What was life like at home as a child growing up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses? What'd that feel like? Was there a lot of joy? Did you get to go out and do a lot of fun things, or was it more, quote, theocratic activities? Or
it was based on theocratic activities. So the average week was meeting attendance, field service, your assemblies and conventions. Everything kind of revolved around that. There were other issues in the family as well that made life challenging. And I suppose my disclaimer here is that I want to be able to speak openly about my childhood.
Sure.
But I have no desire to offend or upset those that have been closest to me. So I'm grateful for what Mum and Dad did to raise their kids. I know they did the best they could.
Sure, and this isn't about blame.
No,
we all have our own truth.
Yes,
and it's based on our experience.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it untrue just because somebody else might see it a different way.
No. I suppose I just struggle with not wanting to misrepresent them, but
sure,
at the same time not wanting to misrepresent myself.
Sure.
So look, life wasn't easy, and there was a lot of friction, and there was a lot of arguing within the family. As an adult now, I can look back and I can see what the contributing factors to that were, and I understand it more clearly.
Yeah.
But as a child, I felt fear in the home. there was the threat of violence at home. It wasn't necessarily violent. There were occasions where it was, but there was the threat of it. So I remember feeling fearful at home of what could happen next. And like I just, again, it's that pressure word, because I recognised that I wasn't the only one feeling pressure as a child. My parents had to be feeling enormous pressure
Yes.
as well, because they're being pushed to conform to this ideology and the culture of being a witness. And, you know, they're trying to provide for a family. They're both dealing with health issues and family issues. And so it wasn't a joy at all. And I remember some occasions where, as a family, we enjoyed one another's company, but I have to be honest and admit that they were few and far between. By and large, it was a difficult environment, and I recognise now as an adult that going to school was an escape because coming home, I felt anxious.
Yeah, you just saying that brings that up for me. I remember I hated to go home from school. I might take the long way home, or do something just to not have to go home, because there was so much stress there.
Yes.
And I know my wife is sitting here shaking her head. Yeah. Same thing. She was on episode 1, so everyone's heard that story. But that stress is definitely there. And you bring up a good point. As hard as it was on us, and we are the ones telling our stories, and that needs to be validated. You know, our families were under a lot of pressure, and it's very hard to try to hold all that together. I really can't. I mean, I know myself, it was just the two of us trying to be loyal, faithful witnesses and make a living. We didn't have any kids. I can't imagine what it's like to try to do that with kids, and all the pressures that puts on you. And I think people break in certain ways, and violence might be one of those ways, you know, that people kind of break. I
agree with that. Again, with the hindsight of adulthood, I recognize that with my mum and dad, they got married quite young when they still had unresolved issues. They had not spent any time working on themselves.
Sure.
To work out who they were and what made them tick, and why it was that certain situations made them felt upset and anxious. So when you're young like that and you haven't sorted those issues out, and then you add children into it in a cult, you've got a perfect storm.
Yeah, you're never going to have time to sort that out.
No, that's right. And only then this added pressure cooker situation, it's just going to cause all sorts of problems. So yeah, there were significant issues within the family as a result of that. It wasn't, looking back now, I realise it wasn't a happy childhood. As much as I'm an optimist and I try to look for the positive, It wasn't a happy childhood.
Sure. But now you did say that school was an escape for you.
Yeah.
So how was it being a young witness at school for you?
Well, for most of my school life, I was the sole witness. Certainly from kindergarten, year 1, year 2, that was it. From 3 to 6, which in Australia is your primary school. Well, the East Coast at least. West Coast has a different system. Again, I was still the only witness. And in year 3 I remember vividly. I was 9, and that year had a really big impression on me. Again, I'm that studious, very conscientious student wanting to do well, having that reinforced at meetings that you've got to give your best, and you're told in your service to Jehovah, you've got to give your best. So again, that pressure, always striving to perform. But I was different, and the kids didn't know what to do with me. I didn't celebrate birthdays. I had to be excluded from that. I wasn't part of religious education. scripture class. No, I was taken to the library for that, and everybody else was Christian, so I was pretty much the only one taken away from that. Christmas, of course. And one of my most vivid memories of that year was two things, actually. One was we'd been given an assignment to do on what we wanted to do when we grew up. And, you know, the boys in the school are policemen and firemen, and some of the girls maybe a nurse. And, well, little 9-year-old Sherrie took this question very seriously and thought, well, what do I want to do when I grow up? And around the same time, we had a circuit assembly.
Oh, no.
I know. And at that circuit assembly, while I've got this question mulling around in my head, 2 pioneers were interviewed, regular pioneers. And I'm listening to their interview, and one of them says that the greatest joy she's ever experienced is bringing other people into the truth. And me as a 9-year-old, I sit there and I think about that. And I think about some of my school friends, and I think, wouldn't it be great if I could make them witnesses too? So what do you think my school assignment was on what I wanted to do when I grew up? I decided that I would do my assignment that I wanted to be a regular pioneer when I grew up.
Hashtag best life ever.
Hashtag, yeah, right. And I got this pale blue cardboard, and I took I think it was the Enjoy Life Forever brochure that was, this is 1983. Yeah. Well, I already said my age, so you don't have to worry about doing the math. And I cut the brochure up for the pictures, stuck them on the board, explained what God's kingdom was. And then as part of this assignment, you had to present it to the class. You had to stand up in front of the class with your cardboard and explain it to the class. And I did that.
Did you count your time?
If I had thought to do that, I probably should have. I didn't count my time. But I got a merit award for it.
Oh, wow.
And that then got told somehow throughout the circuit, and I had a circuit overseer call me to do an experience, which I was very nervous about, but I did this experience on this project that I did. So that's me as a 9-year-old. I've been given recognition, and everybody commends me for having this wonderful goal of being a regular pioneer. So now my life course is set out before me because that's it. I get this award, and then at the end of the year, back in year 3, there were 6 awards that would be given out for the whole year based on how you'd performed during the year. And Australian culture, we have a tall poppy issue in Australia. You can't speak too highly of yourself, and that's a very Australian thing, as well as a witness thing too. My name got called out for one of these merit awards. I was one of the 6th, and I smiled. I was happy. I've done well. The kids in the class were not so impressed. So I got bullied from then on because I was doing well in school and I was different. And I remember for the remainder of that year being ostracized from all the kids in school and walking around the quadrangle there, and I had not a friend. I sat there having lunch by myself, except what I did was I self-talked that I had all of these angels on my side. Mm-hmm. And I would sit there having my lunch with no friends and think, and I'd pray to Jehovah and think, okay, I might not have any physical friends here, but I have all these angels here who are my friends. That's how I got through year 3.
Wow. You know, it's amazing if you think about it, though, what the doctrine does and what was done to you there is you just isolated yourself further.
Yes.
So then now let's talk about the Kingdom Hall, because then you're going to the Kingdom Hall as a kid, and that's where your true friends are supposed to be. So they've made you do things that kind of pushes away all the other kids so that then when you go to the Kingdom Hall, you're going to be more desperate to have those people be your friends.
Right.
So what was life like growing up at the Kingdom Hall for you, going out in the ministry? How did you kind of fit in, giving talks and, doing all the things that a young witness does as a kid?
So again, as a 9-year-old, I started in the theocratic ministry school at that age as well and started giving my first talks. I think, if my memory serves me, it was the My Book of Bible Stories. They were going through that. I remember doing some talks from the Bible Stories book, great material that is. There weren't any kids my age, so I made friends wherever I could, but didn't really have close friends. And because of the dynamic our family had, we weren't necessarily always invited out with other families. Sometimes we were, and I always enjoyed that, but it was more often not the case. So that wasn't, well, we just, you went to meetings. But again, pressure, that word comes back, because it was expected that we answered up in the Watchtower at least once. So I remember in the Sunday meetings I haven't answered yet, and it's paragraph 21.
Yeah, that's pressure.
Better get around to that. And you'd feel the eyes, Dad's eyes sort of looking at you like you haven't answered yet. So yeah, that was kind of meetings. Field service, well, that's in the days where there was no morning tea break for field service. You were out field service for at least 3 hours solid, sometimes longer, and it was a foot slog and not easy. But I didn't know any different. I didn't know what else to compare it to. That was the routine. That was
normal.
That was the life.
Yeah. It's hard to know what else. You don't have any exposure to anything else.
No.
Which I believe is the definition of undue influence.
Correct.
So, all right. So now, how did things progress as you went into your teen years? I don't know exactly when you got baptized. How did that kind of progress for you?
Before I get to the teen years, one thing that I would like to mention, when I got to year 6, my younger sister came into school. She was then in year 3 when I was in year 6. And that was a really interesting dynamic. And I realize now that the cult had a lot to do with why my sister and I didn't get on, because I was so busy trying to be the model child, trying to do everything correctly. My sister was trying to find her own freedom of expression. And I think she knew she didn't want to be me. She wanted to be herself. And as I saw her come into year 3, she was doing things that I would never have dreamed of. Like she was, I remember it was hilarious actually. She got involved in the concert at the end of year. Oh, what is that called in Australia now? I forget what end of year performance, and the kids get up and dance and do whatever they want to. It's like a little, like a recital. Yeah, like something like that. Well, Donna had the courage to get up and dance and do it herself. And she did it to Video Kill the Radio Star. And I remember sitting there in the audience just awed that my sister had enough courage to do that. But not only that, she bent the rules a bit. She had a boyfriend when she was 9. As much as, that just means holding hands maybe and nothing else. Just really having a friend who's a boy more than anything. But I would never have dreamed of doing anything like that. So there was conflict between the two of us, because I was doing everything that you were supposed to do. Donna was pushing the rules. And I think it's kind of important in the storyline to sort of mention that, because her and I had a lot of conflict between us as children. I realise now a lot of it was because of that pressure to conform. I was conforming, she wasn't. That caused conflict. So anyway, year 6, I move into high school then. And that's where things start to get a bit interesting, because I was 13 then in year 7. And at that point in time, the pressure began to get too much for Mum and Dad, and they started to miss a lot of meetings. So meeting attendance dropped off for the family completely. So much so that I remember one night we went to go to the meeting, but it was the Circuit Overseas visit, and the nights had been changed around. And we turned up and there was no one there. We'd gotten the nights wrong completely.
That's like showing up with a green Bible.
Right, exactly. So it totally messed up. But that's where we were at that point of time. So we would be what you would term spiritually weak. At that time, no field service was happening. I remember going to a meeting at that age, and the service overseer came up to me to tell me that I was now an irregular publisher because I hadn't put in a report. And I was horrified. I didn't really understand what he was telling me. I didn't recognize what it meant. All I knew was I was having an elder tell me something that wasn't good. So that's where we were at that point. At the same time, at school, there was an interfaith Christian fellowship group. And again, I'm still the only witness. And it was my music teacher that ran this interfaith group. And she started to show interest in me and ask me questions about my beliefs. And I started to answer those questions. She started to then invite me to come along to the meetings, for want of a better word, the gatherings that they would have at lunchtime with other kids my age. And at first I resisted because, no. Babylon the Great, don't have anything to do with. But after a while, they seemed like good people and they were reading the Bible. And I thought, what's the harm in going? So I went. Now, this wasn't just any interfaith fellowship group. They were actually speaking in tongues.
Oh, wow.
So, and it was an interesting experience for me as a 13-year-old because I was watching them. I felt nervous all the time because I was thinking I shouldn't be here. But I recognized I knew more about the Bible than they did. I had more knowledge of where the scriptures were. They'd remember something, couldn't remember where it was. I went straight to it. It was a very interesting experience. Around the same time, though, Mum and Dad decide we're going to move from Sydney and move to Perth, to the other side of the country. And my first thought, I'm now not long before 14. I'm going to miss all these friends. They buy me a Bible as a going away gift. I know Mike's eyes have just gone really wide and big.
Yeah, that's an easy way to get outed.
I know. I'm looking at this Bible thinking, I can't ever take this. I cannot take this Bible. But they'd obviously, it was white leather and gold edged, and it had pictures in it. And I think it was a New International Version. And I recognised that was a costly thing for them to get together. And I thought, this is a really nice gesture. But I can't possibly take this. This is going to cause. So anyway, I kind of explained it to the teacher that she said, that's okay. When you get there and you feel it's okay, write me a letter and we'll send it over. Well, the letter never got sent.
Sure.
But anyway, I know.
Yeah.
So
it's just another example of how the Jehovah's Witnesses, expect everyone else to bend to them. And even something nice like that. Yeah, it was a lovely gesture. You can't just take a nice gift from somebody. It's a Bible of all things. But it's not the New World Translation.
No, it's not the New World Translation. So you can't go anywhere near it.
But Jehovah's Witnesses don't have their own Bible.
No, that's right. No.
No.
So we moved to Perth, and that was a huge transition. That was just monstrous in many ways. But I mentioned the story of the interfaith group because to me as an impressionable young teenager, that made a very big impact on me because I felt like I had now tested the religion against something else. It wasn't like I'd been raised in a religion and knew no different. I took that experience of 6 months, getting to know other people in another faith, as knowledge and experience for me to be able to compare the truth or Jehovah's Witness doctrine against something else. So when we went to the convention at the end of 1988, and I think if my memory serves, it was an international, and it was the Divine Justice Convention. Something happened during that convention that just really, really impacted me. And that was, and they do it at every international, I now realise, is you have candidates from other countries come along. And at this particular convention, a big deal was made about those international candidates. I can't remember if it was the Saturday or the Sunday. I want to say the Sunday, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. They invited the candidates to walk in front of the stadium and wave at the stadium. And you know those events get the emotions whipped up. Well, my emotions were whipped up. And I just thought, wow, no other religion does this. No other religion has this degree of unity. We all get taught the same thing. Doesn't matter what race we are. This is nothing like that interfaith Christian fellowship group. Auntie Bev squirming next to me on my left. but that it was at that point that I, as a young, impressionable teenager, went, this must be the truth.
Sure.
And a few months later, I made the decision that I wanted to get baptized. But I didn't tell Mum and Dad that. I went and confided in a sister in the congregation instead. When Mum and Dad found that out, they were none too happy that I hadn't spoken to them first. And I don't really know why I did that. I just did. Needless to say, anyway, at the end of 1989, November 11, Remembrance Day, I was baptized. Not just shy of turning 15.
That's a pretty big deal. So were you the type that got baptized and instantly jumped into, I mean, you're a sister, so there's not much you
not
can
much
do.
else I can do.
But but were you the type who jumped into auxiliary pioneering or something like that, you know, maybe when you weren't in school or?
In school holidays, yes, I did. And I was determined to leave school at year 10, which I did. And I went straight into auxiliary pioneering for 6 months, and then I started regular pioneering in 1991.
So, how old were you then?
16.
16?
Yeah, 16.
So then how did things play out, you know, as you're approaching young adulthood? I don't know how it is in Australia, but here in America at 18, you're seen as an adult. And, you know, that's kind of a big time in one's life where things are changing. Usually you've graduated high school and now you have options. You can go to college or not if you're a witness, but you can do whatever, you know, that's where people start to individuate from their families and maybe, you know, move out on their own or, you know, go off in these adventures as, you know, quote, adults. I don't know if that's the same in Australia, but how did that kind of play out as you got toward that age?
Well, when I got baptized, Dad made it very clear that as far as they were concerned from a spiritual point of view, I was an adult then. Because whatever I did from that point on, I stood in front of Jehovah for. So there was that.
No pressure.
Yeah, exactly. No pressure. So, but of course, you know, you're still a child living in the home. When I started auxiliary pioneering after I'd left school, I was looking for work. In fact, I'd actually started working at McDonald's. That was my first job before I'd finished school. I was doing that. I was paying board and trying to contribute to my expenses in the household. After I'd left school and I had a bit more time, obviously, worked a bit more at McDonald's and was obviously out in field service a lot more. Started saving towards getting a car because my goal was at the end of that first year, I would be going to Pioneer School and I would need to be able to drive in order to get to Pioneer School. So I had to have a car and I had to have my license. So that took my focus really during that first year. And I have to say, I was enjoying it. I did enjoy it. You've got a true believer. I really believed I was doing the right thing. We were in a congregation that I was the 12th pioneer. It was buzzing.
Yeah, that's a lot of activity.
There was a lot going on. I was the youngest pioneer. I was made a lot of because of that. I had all of these experienced pioneers that I could spend time with, ones who then went on circuit work afterwards, missionary service. Like it was a happening congregation. So I look back at that time quite happy, actually, and content with how I spent my time and the ones that I got to spend my time with.
Did you have a lot of friends? Let me say, did you have a lot of peer friends?
Yeah. I had a few, but there was more to come. So I had a few that I was close to. And I was just, at that age when you get your license, you're starting to get a little bit of independence, and I was enjoying that time of my life, but started to enjoy it a lot more when I got to 19 and made the decision to leave home. And that happened because when I turned 19, like, useless goal, but I wanted to go to Bethel. As a single sister living in Perth, you got no chance. But I still wanted to go to Bethel. So the moment I turned 19 at that assembly, was actually a convention, I went running up to the district overseer, who, by the way, is now left the organisation and is an atheist.
Oh, awesome.
Just saying that.
Awesome.
Anyhow, I went running up to him and told him, I'm 19 now, I can apply to Bethel. And he said, oh, that's very nice to hear, Sherrie, but what are you going to do in between now and Bethel? Because I'd been pioneering 3 years now. And I just glibly went, what other options are there for a single sister? I'll serve where the need's greater. And I said it rather glibly, but he took it seriously, went and spoke to my father and told him and said, I've just had this conversation with Sherrie. She said she wants to serve where the need is. There's a need in this congregation in Scarborough, and there's no pioneers there. Perhaps you should talk about it. Well, Dad took that seriously because the district overseer had gone and talked to him.
Sure.
I get home from that assembly to find there's been this conversation, and Dad's actually behind it. He thinks it's a great idea. And Mum was a bit cautious of it, but she got behind it as well. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God.
Watch what you say.
Now it looks like I'm leaving home. Wow.
Jenny, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious to know, you've talked a lot about what you've been doing at this time. Were your parents, you had said that your parents had stopped going to meetings pretty much altogether. How was their meeting attendance during this period of time?
Thanks for bringing that up because I missed that part of the story. The move from Sydney to Perth was because they recognised their spiritual condition was poor, and they felt that the lifestyle in Sydney, because of the higher cost of living there, would not make it possible for them to make ends meet financially and have all of the commitments in the religion. So they felt the best thing to do was simplify, sell what they had in Sydney, move to Perth. That way they'd be able to simplify. In fact, because of the properties they sold in Sydney, they were able to buy outright in Perth and not have a mortgage. And I get the sense of that. So when we moved to Perth and we did that, Mum didn't have to work full time. Dad didn't even have to work full time. Dad actually started regular pioneering. So he regular pioneered for 3 years. My first year of regular pioneering overlapped with his last year of pioneering. He would have been 40 at the time, and in his last year of pioneering he was appointed an elder and was also diagnosed with diabetes type 2. When he was diagnosed with diabetes, he felt the demands of being an elder, regular pioneering, working part-time was too much. So he dropped regular pioneering and focused on work and his role as an elder. in the end, he was an elder for, I think it was just over 20 years. So they worked out, it didn't go back to what it was in Sydney. So it's probably the best way that I can describe that. And I'm not sure, it's a interesting hypothetical to play out. What would have happened if we didn't move, if we'd stayed in Sydney? I have no idea where we would be if they hadn't made that move.
So then they made the move, and then, so did you ultimately end up going to where the need was greater?
I did move to Scarborough.
You did? So let me ask Beverley. So you're not just a passive bystander and all this. I mean, you actually go to meetings with them at times and things like that. What did you think when you saw Sherrie, at that critical point of time? She's not going to college and she's about to kind of go deeper in and go do this. Did you have any thoughts on that, or were you around enough to see that?
Well, I knew that she was really interested in going to Bethel. And I knew that she was a pioneer and she was very, very interested in it. And I thought it would be wonderful for her to go there. And I actually went there with you, Sherrie.
Yeah.
That's another thing. Okay. Yeah. And all right. Well, I'll pass you over to Sherrie now.
Okay.
I'm glad you actually raised that, because before I left home, I was 18, so I'd already been regular pioneering for 2 years. But Mum and Dad made it possible for me to travel back to the East Coast for a holiday for 3 weeks. And this would be the first time that I was going on a holiday without Mum and Dad, on my own. And I was going to be in Sydney and Brisbane. Dad has 2 sisters, and one of his sisters is in Brisbane with my 2 cousins. So I would get to stay with them for a bit. And the proviso for me to stay in Sydney, the only person we had that we knew was Auntie Bev, was that she would have to take me to Bethel. And if Auntie Bev did that, then it was all right for me to stay with a worldly relative. So, and that ended up it was the first time that I had seen Auntie Bev since we'd moved to Perth from 13. So it was a long time since I'd seen her. And a lot had happened to me as an individual between 13 and 18, of course.
Sure, yeah.
So now I was going over there. I was so excited to go to Bethel. I was thrilled that Auntie Bev was happy to take me. And we caught up with a couple, remember Carolyn and Llewellyn. And Nana came. Yep, that's right. That's right. We've still got the photos. Nana came as well. But it was on the car ride back home afterwards. It was about a 2-hour drive back from Bethel down to where Auntie Bev's house is. And because we'd just been to Bethel, we had a great conversation. And Auntie Bev shared with me her side of the story, of what had happened when Mum became a witness, a little bit of what she's already said earlier now. And I realised and recognised that the right thing hadn't been done by Auntie Bev. She hadn't had things explained to her properly. And I, at the same time, realised that in the early 1970s, the religion itself was more fire and brimstone. It was more black and white, and it wasn't really considerate of anybody outside. Not that it's really considerate now, but there is a little bit more attention given to trying to reason or explain things a bit more.
Or they'll at least lie to you to cover up because they know how it's going to look.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And I remember that trip back being very impressionable on me for seeing that Auntie Bev, right, okay, she's not a witness, but she still deserves being treated with respect.
Yes.
And having it explained to her why we don't celebrate Christmas or birthdays or Mother's Day or whatever it is, and not just a flat no. And that made a big impression on me. I saw things from a different point of view, and it was probably the first time that I had seen things from a different point of view.
Yeah, you're seeing Auntie Bev as a person.
Yes.
With their own feelings and questions about this, instead of just, I don't know, just cutting somebody off, just that whole yes and no thing. that's so harsh. And if you can just explain yourself to a person, even if they disagree, they feel like they've been seen and heard too. And everybody wants that. Nobody wants to just be cut out.
Of course, the flip side to that was that the more you acknowledge, the more you realize that a worldly person is a good person.
Yes.
You start to have another conflict happening within, which is, how can they be destroyed at Armageddon? How can these people who are good, who are not causing any harm, who are being respectful by taking me to Bethel and doing something completely like, she didn't have to do that, but she very willingly took me to Bethel. So that's being respectful, showing dignity. How can that be worthy of destruction? So already, and that those thoughts were happening. Of course, they were pushed away at that time, but it was a really interesting trip when I went over. That was in 93.
So where do you go from there? So I guess that... Oh, go ahead, Bev.
I just want to say something. When we went to Bethel, they showed us all around the place. Very interesting. And I was quite interested in this, what they did. And then we had lunch. And I thought it was really nice because they had the guys had white shirts, black ties, and served everybody. And the meal was superb. And I said to Mum, this is utopia. This is bloody terrific. We could be here. Except you had to get up and down to pray all the time. Well, that gave me the shit, so that was the end of
that. Everybody has their limits, right? So then, Sherrie, you go for... So then this was before you left to serve where the need is greater.
Yes.
So now how does... I don't know. It seems like a pretty tall order to ask a 19-year-old girl to go to another congregation away from home, pretty much really her first time out on her own. And you're supposed to, be the only pioneer and this example and everything. Again, pressure. So what was that like for you going on that? I mean, was it an adventure or was it just filled with pressure or a bit of both? Or?
It was an incredible adventure. It was, it wasn't going to be possible for me to do it completely on my own. Word had been sent out that this particular congregation had one pioneer and she was leaving. So they would have nothing. So it wasn't just me. Fortunately, there were another 2 pioneers that had also been approached. In fact, the word had gone out so that when I moved into the congregation, 8 ended up coming, and 1 was announced every week for 8 weeks.
Wow.
So it was exciting. It was really, really exciting. So before I moved, I was going to move in with 3 others, 2 of which were pioneers. And we had a little meeting together to work out, okay, where would we live? How would we make things work? And I got to say, I think we handled it pretty well. We each decided we'd cook one night of the week for the whole 4 of us. My night was, I think, a Thursday night. And Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights, it was a fend for yourself or we're all going out socially, so it doesn't really matter. We assigned cleaning duties and tasks. We had it all pretty organised. We had a little jar for phones, for the phone bill, because that was before mobile phones, everybody. There was actually a time before mobile phones. There was only one phone in the unit, and we had a little jar there, so if we used the phone, we put coins in so that when the bill came, we could handle it. When the electricity or the gas bill came in, we just divided it by 4.
So you all lived together?
We all lived together.
And like a little... How big was the apartment?
It was a 3-bedroom unit.
Really?
So
attached to the Kingdom Hall? Or?
No. Okay. No, it had nothing. It was not near the Kingdom Hall at all. It was in a block of 8 units.
Huh.
And we were in one unit and it had 3 bedrooms, and I shared the master bedroom with another girl.
Oh, wow.
She was 17. And
wow.
I gotta say, we had fun.
Yeah.
We had fun. Like, it was a hard slog because you had new pioneers and none of us had any We didn't have our own little ministries. We had no return visits. We had no studies. We had nothing. We had to build it up from scratch. So in those first few weeks and months, we were doing 8 hours a day of door to door. It was a foot slog and a half. It was tiring, but we had each other, and we were so excited getting to know each other for the first time. There was a real buzz. The hall had only just been built. It was a quick build, and I think we'd only been in the congregation 6 weeks when it had its dedication. And the dedication talk was done by the same district overseer who had dobbed me in for moving to that congregation anyhow. No, I look back at that time as joyous, and it was exciting because it was my first time out of home, and all of a sudden I had to make my own decisions. I didn't have mum and dad to tell me anymore what was right and what was wrong, and some of those decisions were challenged by what the others were deciding, especially in the areas of entertainment and music. Mum and dad had been very strict, I don't think as strict as yourself, Jenny. We did have a TV. But
so worldly.
I know. But there were things that were definitely, like Dirty Dancing. No, you did not watch that. There were things that, and I was shocked to learn that my new pioneer buddies not only had watched Dirty Dancing, but they enjoyed it and they were singing the songs. And I found this very confronting because
You approved.
right. Thanks, Auntie Bev. It was challenging then.
Yeah, of course it was. Yeah. You're seeing, people that you respect who are also pioneers who were chosen for this role, and they have different standards that aren't held up as high as yours. And as a pioneer, you're supposed to be the person setting the standards for the congregation. So you were to be more upright and blameless than anybody.
Right.
Yeah. So, that sounds, I can only imagine how hard it was because you didn't have, the return visits and the Bible studies. That's kind of the easy time. So you were doing a hard time knocking on doors 8 hours a day, trying to build that up just so that you could have some easy wins in there. So now you're like 19, right? So what's the next milestone after that? How does that progress? How's that go for you?
I was in that congregation for about 3.5 years and thoroughly enjoyed my time there, but had a lot of life's lessons during that time. And one of the big things for me was I had noticed, any congregation does it, any group of friends does it too. You get cliquey with, right?
Sure.
And I recognized in that time that I didn't want to be the one left behind. I needed to be independent, and I needed to be resilient, and I had to prove that to myself. So after a while I thought, I think it would be healthy to move on. You need to start feeling other territories. And I decided to move back to New South Wales as a result. So Auntie Bev enters into the picture again here because I couldn't move back to Sydney. I didn't know anyone in Sydney. And Sydney seemed like a big bad city to me that was very expensive. So I looked again at what the needs list was. And lo and behold, the congregation that covers the territory of Auntie Bev's area was on the needs list. It only had 2 pioneers in it, large territory. And I thought, well, we could do that. So I gave Auntie Bev a call and asked her to see if it would be okay if I could board with her. And I think maybe I should pass on the mic so you can tell that story.
I received a call from Sherrie to say, Auntie Bev, I'm coming over to New South Wales. I said, oh, wonderful, darling. Where are you going to live? Greenwell Point. Oh, okay. When are you coming? And she said, shortly. Okay, so I spoke to my husband Raymond and he said, yeah, that's all right. She can stay down there with her grandmother because the middle floor we keep for guests, friends, and Sherrie can stay down with Nana. Right, okay, that was terrific. So she came over. I don't know whether I pick you up at the airport. I can't remember now.
I remember. I remember because we had my car. We'd packed that up with a lot of my possessions and put it on a train because I wasn't going to drive 3,500 kilometres to get to Sydney on my own. No. So put that on a train, and then I flew over on the Midnight Horror. This leaves at midnight in Perth and it arrives 6:30 in the morning in Sydney. It's a horrible flight, but anyway. Auntie Bev was there to meet me at the airport. Yep. With Nana. And we then had to drive to Villawood to pick up my car. And then I followed Auntie Bev home in my car. And Nana was passenger in my car to keep me awake because I'd been flying the whole night and I was tired. And I didn't sleep at all because I was so excited. So, yeah, we drove down the 3 hours from Sydney down to Greenwell Point to get down there. And, yeah, I was pushing myself completely out of my comfort zone. I didn't know what it was going to be like in a country congregation. I didn't have work. I had sent, by this time I was working in the banking industry, and I'd sent letters to all of the different banks in the area. All of them had come back one by one, thanks, but no thanks, don't have a position. So, and that made me feel uneasy because I didn't have any employment. I wasn't sure how the congregation would receive me because I knew no one at all. So I was really just pushing myself and testing what I was capable of.
Yeah. You've got, I mean, honestly, by that age, you've already made a couple pretty big trips. So you're staying with Auntie Bev. You're in this new congregation. How did you assimilate into that? Did you fit in pretty well, or?
Well, as I say, it was a country congregation, so I had to lose my city ways pretty quick. And I didn't realize how cityfied I was. So I learnt I needed to just dress differently. I needed to approach people differently. I needed to relax a lot and just chill, speak more slowly, and not rush to get to my point. And that applied just as much in the congregation as it did to the ministry as well. So I found it a really interesting transition, just trying to get to know people for who they were. And I did really enjoy my time in Nowra. I had a great time. It was also a real challenge because there weren't as many pioneers, and the pioneers that were around, our schedules conflicted. So if I was still going to meet my 90-hour requirement, I was going to have to do some alone time. And that also challenged me and pushed me.
I did that. That was very hard.
It ain't easy.
No, not at all.
It is not easy. But I worked out ways to manage it, and I enjoyed it. I had a really good time. Work was hard. For the first 4 months, I was unemployed. And when I first arrived in the congregation, the elders told me straight away, you need to go down to Centrelink and get unemployment benefits. And I found that hugely confronting because I didn't want to do that. I've always been one that wants to work for my money. But they were right. I didn't know it was going to be 4 months before I got work. So I went and did that. I was very proactive about trying to find work. I made up flyers, trying to sell what it was, whatever I could do, which was not very much, but I was willing to do whatever. Then someone within the little township that I was living managed a caravan park, and she offered me work cleaning caravans. And I was just, great, yes, I'll do it. Thank you so much. She was fantastic to me. Yeah. She was so good to me because very quickly she was then giving me opportunities to learn how the park ran. And she offered me a full-time position to teach me how to manage the park. I was only 22, and I realised this was a really big opportunity, but I turned it down because I'm a pioneer. And that wasn't part of my life plan.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're not alone there. So All right, so you're 22, and up to this point, I mean, anyone listening can see that you were quite sincere about what you were doing. You were, by all intents and purposes, the model witness. And now you're sitting on my couch.
How did we get here?
So how does one go from this person who's kind of driven by the pressure, who's performing, who's doing what seems like all the right things, even has standards higher than the other pioneers? How do you go from that person? You know, there's so many Jehovah's Witnesses out there right now who are that person. And, you know, I was that person. I was very sincere and I did the same thing. So how does it all change for you? What are the progressions that go through your adulthood that take you to where you are today?
So at this point, I have to bring in my husband.
Yeah, we gotta have Sasha.
we gotta have Sasha, and that story goes back a little. We first met when I was 19. In fact, before I moved to Scarborough, just in the months beforehand, actually. And I don't think we thought anything of each other at first. I do think that Sasha was, I want to say, impressed that I was leaving home and going on this whole new adventure. And he knew some of the other pioneers that I'd only just now met. So we're kind of in the same social circle. And towards, this is 1993, getting towards the latter end of 94. Getting towards the end of 94, Sasha, he was also regular pioneering, and he applied to do construction at Bethel. So this is Perth to Sydney. Well, Bethel sent back saying no, not to construction, but here's an application for the family. And I knew as soon as he got that, they wanted him in Bethel. So he filled in the form, and sure enough, he gets accepted for a year, not the 3 months construction that he was originally wanting, but for at least a year. And it was just in those few weeks before he was leaving that he approached me and told me he was interested in me from a totally different point of view now. And I turned him down because I thought, you can't be going to Bethel and be focusing on a new life there and still be tied to someone back home. I didn't feel it was right for him. I didn't think it was fair. So I said no. And it upset both of us, but I felt that was the right thing to do. The next year in 95, we had Perth and Sydney were doing the air flights. The airline was doing a special deal that you could go to Sydney for 24 hours. You could do these flights, the midnight horror one, the midnight to 6 a.m. So you could arrive in Sydney at 6 a.m., spend the whole day in Sydney, and then at 9 p.m. go back to Perth. I know, crazy. But they were $200 return tickets, which is just absurd. So a group of us pioneers were like, hey, we could go to Bethel for a day from Perth. And Sherrie, you know someone in Bethel, you know Sasha. And I'm like, oh, well, that didn't really end that well. I'm not so sure about this. But we did it. We all went. So there were 3 of us that went. And I'd had to ring Sasha beforehand to tell him that we were going to come over and could he organise a tour for us so that we could see Bethel and lunch, because you had to be sponsored by someone to have lunch there. Well, Sasha organised for himself to be the tour guide, and we were his guest for lunch. Anyway, by the end of that day, as we went back to the airport, something obviously was going on between Sasha and I, and we agreed to start a long-distance relationship, which long-distance relationships are hard for anyone, for witnesses. Pressure is incredible. That relationship only lasted 8 months because Sasha was rooming with a Bethelite who was, what's the expression? Single for the Lord, single for the house, they called it, actually. He was a bachelor. In fact, he wore a wedding ring to put single sisters off.
What?
Yes. And that was Sasha's roommate.
Oh, boy.
And Sasha didn't feel entirely comfortable with this particular person, but and this brother basically said to Sasha, "Are you serious about this sister or not? Is this really what you want?" Anyway, long and short of it, he talked Sasha out of the relationship. And so Sasha then called me and broke up the relationship. So now when I tell you that I moved back to New South Wales, we'd been broken up for about 18 months. And my motive in moving back had nothing to do with Sasha. It was, as far as I was concerned, I had an earlier stake on the East Coast. I was born there. But when I moved back, within 6 weeks, Sasha called Auntie Bev and said that he knew I was back, and he asked if he could talk to me. And I remember Auntie Bev coming up to me with the phone in her hand and saying, "Sasha's on the phone for you." And I answered it and told him he had to hide in calling me after how he'd ended it. But anyway, that was it's very interesting courting or dating, as you would both know.
Oh, yes.
But long story short, we got married on the 7th of August 1999. Oh, hang on. Oh.
So while Sherry's staying here with me, there's a knock on the door one morning, and Sasha was there. Now, I had never met him. I didn't know Sasha. And he said, "May I see Sherry?" I said, "Oh, sure. Come in, dear." And I closed the door. I brought him in, closed the door, went to Sherry. "I don't want to see him. I'm not going to see him. I'm not going to see him." I said, "Sherry, you are. Sasha, come in, please." And I left them. Bye.
Thanks,
Auntie Bev, the matchmaker.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was a bit of colluding going on.
So you got married in August of, you said, what?
1999.
99. And so how did things go from there? Because, you know, obviously he was at Bethel. So did you go to Bethel?
No. So he was in Bethel for 5 years at that point. And ironically, I'd applied to Bethel 4 years running. I really wanted to go to Bethel. But then, obviously, they weren't going to accept me. And I stopped applying then, actually, because okay, this sounds really weird now, but I actually enjoyed being a pioneer. So,
no, I could see that.
Yeah.
I mean,
What about the work you had?
Oh,
You doing the cleaning and then you didn't do it.
yeah. What Auntie Bev is just mentioning here is that while I did that caravan cleaning for a little while, my uncle, Auntie Bev's husband, decided that this really wasn't acceptable. And he spoke to Auntie Bev about it and told her basically, find her something else to do. They had a company where they were manufacturing and exporting underground coal mining equipment. And Auntie Bev offered me a job in the office there, which was fantastic. I got to work with them for 18 months, had an absolute ball. I learnt so much. It was a really great time. And you guys, you do the manual labour of cleaning, and hats off to you. I know how hard it is. It's hard work. So I was thrilled and grateful to have an office job where I wasn't physically pushed as much.
I understand.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a great time. But yes, Sasha was in Bethel, and ironically we then have the opportunity of going into Bethel as a married couple straight after marriage. And Sasha and I gave that really serious thought. We were both a little unsure whether it would be the wisest decision for us. And I went and spoke to a sister. I took her into my confidence to sort of get her opinion, because she had gone into Bethel straight as a married a wife as well. For 8 years she'd been in Bethel. And so I asked her what advice she could give me. And she made a really good comment to me. She told me that what she'd had to do was she gave up her congregation. She gave up her ministry. She gave up her work. She gave up all of her friends and basically was assimilated into her husband's life and took on his friends, his work, his employment. And she found that really challenging. She said it was hard to define who she was and what her identity was through that period. And that was something I'd never even considered. I hadn't thought about that. And so Sasha and I talked about that together, and we decided, no, it's probably best that we don't go into Bethel first off. We decided that we
Auntie Bev is clapping her
hands.
hands.
I hadn't noticed that. But we decided that we'd stay in regular pioneer work. So at our wedding, we had a branch committee member marry us, and we had full-time servants. And it was what we could afford. It was a simple wedding, but it was what we could manage. I think that each one of our attendees would be very surprised and somewhat dismayed to see where Sasha and I are at now. But yeah, for the first 18 months of our marriage, we managed to regular pioneer, but it was really, really hard. It was tough. When Sasha left Bethel, he didn't have many skills under his belt because he'd pretty much gone from completing schooling. I think maybe only did 1 year of pioneering, maybe a little bit more before he went straight into Bethel. So he didn't have a trade to draw on or fall back on. So he went into window cleaning. Like all good regular pioneers do.
Absolutely.
So he went into window cleaning, and I was doing 3 days a week office work for an occupational health company, still trying to do 90 hours a month. It was hard. I remember being so tired all of the time, just constantly drained. It was really challenging. And after about 18 months, I think Sasha and I were both at the point of burnout, but we were both struggling to make ends meet financially. The window cleaning wasn't always reliable, very weather dependent. So as soon as it's wet, there's no windows getting cleaned, which means there's no money coming in. It was really tough. So we made the decision that we would have to stop pioneering because it was too difficult. We were struggling too much, and there wasn't any assistance from anyone. So
what about Jehovah?
Well, we prayed long and hard, and nothing was forthcoming.
Yeah, that happens to a lot of people. Yeah. I was there too when I pioneered.
Yeah. So, but you do get that, right? You get just
wait on Jehovah, trust on Jehovah. Yeah. Well, Jehovah's not paying my bills.
That's right. These bills are sitting here and nothing's happening. Right. So we've got to make this happen somehow. So it was tough. So, and that I found it really hard stopping pioneering. After 10 years, it was such a blow to my identity and who Absolutely. I thought I was.
Yes.
It was crushing to stop. And the congregation didn't necessarily help. Because I also noticed that when you stop, you're no longer viewed the same way, shall we say. You're kind of put on a little bit of a pedestal when you're pioneering. You're looked up to in the congregation. You stop, and your status drops.
And it drops below the others.
Yes.
The average publisher now sees you as lower. You couldn't cut it.
Yes.
And there must be something wrong with you.
Yes.
There must be some reason. And it can be a pretty rough time.
Yep. Failure.
You want to eat.
Yeah.
Well, you kind of, yes.
But yeah, none of those other publishers were paying for your food either.
No, that's right. So Sasha and I eked out the best that we could, and we worked hard. We did the best that we could manage. But things started to change for us probably 2012. There's a lot that happens. I mean, you know that. You've been married only a year or two less than what we have. And I look back, and I'm still trying to, I suppose, conduct a bit of an autopsy on the destruction of my faith and sort of see the little landmarks of where things happened. And there were a number of them. In 2004, Sasha and I had endured something that occurred that I won't go into the detail of, but what we had gone through, I expected the elders to be that hiding place from the storm, and they just weren't. Not only weren't they weren't anywhere to be seen. And it absolutely crushed me that here we were in a situation that they knew about, and they weren't offering any support whatsoever. And that was one of the first, I think, big prokes into my faith, because I had to work out, okay, why am I doing this for? And I came to a little, okay, I'm not here for men, I'm here for Jehovah. So
you start reasoning things away.
Yeah, you start to tell yourself things like that. But then more things happen, more incidences occur that chip away. And even at those little foundations that you try to support it back up with, they start crumbling as well. So it gets to 2012, 2013. By this time, I've given up on having a ministry. Just making ends meet is hard enough. And just Sasha and I focusing on our marriage is enough. Getting to meetings, that's enough. I'm not going to push myself to do more than that. And if people don't like it, too bad. This becomes my attitude. And it gets supplemented by, is not the right word, but I suppose supported by the fact that I'm now working full-time, and I'm working at a cancer practice, and I feel I'm doing good work. I'm helping people. And that, I suppose, gave me what I felt I was missing from pioneering, because when I was pioneering, I felt like I was helping people. And now I felt like I was helping people again. And so if my meeting attendance wasn't up to scratch, or my ministry wasn't as good as what it used to be, I wasn't perturbed by that, because I found satisfaction and joy in the work that I was doing. And that then, 2012 was when I agreed to do a university course for 2 years to help my position at work, so that I was more educated to do the duties that I was expected to do. But of course, as we all know, university education is not to be done. And I'd spoken to Sasha about it first. We agreed together that, okay, I would do this course. Sasha was concerned that I'd still be able to meet my responsibilities of meeting attendance and field service on the weekends. I assured him I could. We hired a young witness in the congregation to help me with bookkeeping, so that I would have time to focus on my studies, but also still have time to focus on theocratic activity. And we kept it quiet that I was doing this course. When I first started it, Sasha wasn't really interested in the course at all. And I kind of soldiered on and thought, well, I want to do it. I need to do it. I enjoy my job. I've got to get this done. But over the next 2 years, Sasha's attitude towards it changed, and quite drastically. By 2013, he started to show an interest in what I was learning and started to ask me questions. And at the same time as Sasha's interest changes, my meeting attendance drops off more, because what I was trying to pull off was virtually impossible. I'm trying to pull off working full time, doing a university course, and being a Jehovah's Witness and a housewife, and like,
there's too many irons in the fire.
Yeah. It was all, and what was crumbling first, and because I really wasn't interested in giving it the same attention anymore, was my faith. But I realized that is what had to happen in order for me to be able to open my eyes and realize the truth about the truth. It was not going to happen with me at the level I was at before. I would not even look at it.
Yeah, you have to have a little distance. That's why they want you, even when you go on vacation or something, to, take your meeting clothes, take your books, find a Kingdom Hall and wherever you're going on vacation. And they want you to do that because they know that if you break the chain and you get a little space from it, your brain can finally start processing everything that's being drilled into your head, and you'll start looking at it with fresh eyes. And they know it can't withstand that. So they have to keep you tethered to it as much as possible so that you'll stay.
Yeah.
Have to control you.
Yeah, it's just control. It's just absolute control in every aspect of your life. So now you've gotten yourself a little space, a little window of
Yes,
opportunity.
That's right.
So how did that impact your faith? Having that little space there, did it allow you to start processing things or thinking about things differently?
It did, but I have to say again, it was Sasha that was helping me more than anything else. I had that bit of breathing space, and I began to be quite troubled about Auntie Bev and my mother-in-law, who were both not witnesses, and I was spending more time with them and recognizing that they're good people, and it began to bother me that they would be destroyed at Armageddon. But again, I was putting band-aids over it. So the mantra I told myself at that point was, no, Jehovah will judge them. I could not say they're not going to survive. That's not my call. I trust that Jehovah will look after them. And that's as far as I could take it at that point. I couldn't question past that. But it was irritating. There was something else that happened, a major thing that happened in the congregation with a family that we knew quite well. And it involved one of their children, and the way we saw the congregation respond to that was absolutely appalling. That disturbed both Sasha and I enormously. And although it was discouraged, we continued to still support that family and see that family. Even though their faith had been completely destroyed by what had happened, we remained friends with them, and we do to this day. So there were things that were starting to occur, and there were things that we could not excuse. We couldn't just, but we still kept going to meetings. It was this is, as everyone who has made it out knows, this is not an overnight process. This takes years to break down before you can leave.
It takes years to break you down to get you in. Well, actually, that's usually a faster process because you've already got the baggage, the trauma, whatever it is. But if you're a kid growing up in it, it still takes years to indoctrinate you as a child. And it's not an overnight process to get out. It's a lot of people think, well, what's that one thing that got you out? It's not usually one thing. A lot of times, sometimes it can be one very traumatic, huge event. But for a lot of us, it's just, a little cut here, a little cut there, and eventually you're free.
Yeah, it's the culmination of things. So one of those major culminating things was particularly concerning my husband with what had happened to Sasha. He was a very dedicated ministerial servant and very conscientious and diligent about his duties, was always the first at the hall. And while my meeting attendance had waned, he would still go anyway. And he never put pressure on me. And that, I just can't tell you how much I appreciated that. Having had so much pressure on my life, to have him say, on a Tuesday night when I'm busy at work, things have gone pear-shaped, I don't know how I'm going to get back home in order to get the meeting on time. And he'd just go, don't worry, you're doing the best you can. That's fine. I'll see you afterwards. He made it possible. He created an environment for me to be me without judgment. He just accepted it. But he would always tell me, because I knew it was going to put him in an awkward position when he got to the hall. But he'd tell me how he handled that. At first it was difficult for him because he'd get, oh, Sherry's not here. She's not well. That assumption, because you can only miss a meeting because your left leg's fallen off or something's going on that's catastrophic.
Yeah, and people are nosy and they want to know.
Right, exactly. So Sasha would tell me that was being said. But he worked out a way around it. He flipped the script, and he would say to them, yeah, she's busy at work tonight, but I'm so proud of her. She's doing such a good job. She's helping people with cancer. Well, what are they going to say to that? He changed the negativity, put it into a positive, and it became to be a source of irritation to him that he would get this questioning from the congregation. So I knew that was happening. Like we communicated really well together. But yes, my meeting attendance was waning. Sasha was then starting to get criticised by the elders because I wasn't doing as much as I should. I was not the exemplary wife.
Oh, can't you get your wife in line?
Right. Which worsened considerably when they found out that I was doing a university course. which poor Auntie Bev feels very badly about this, I know, but she let the cat out of the bag in all innocence. In all innocence. Do you want to tell the story? Yes. Okay.
We're invited to have dinner this evening with friends, and we sat down. They were making pizzas. The children used to make the pizzas. They were very nice. We enjoyed ourselves. We'd be talking and laughing, and we're sitting there, and I was so excited because Sherrie was going to receive the Barbara Meredith Memorial Award for the work she was doing. And I said, "Isn't it wonderful? She's going to get this award." "What?" he said, the father. He's talking and looking at Sherrie, and "Is this a university course?" Well, you could really cut the air with a knife. And I think 10 minutes we left. I felt so bad.
And really, how silly is it that you should feel bad, or that anyone would look on someone getting an award for doing something good in a negative light? You know, yeah, of course you were excited. Anybody, you should have been excited, and they should have been excited too if they were good friends. But that's not how it works.
No. So Sasha then got reprimanded, and he was spoken to by the elders, told he had to get his wife in line. And how could he be permitting me doing a university course? I mean, by then, the course was all done and dusted. I'd finished it. But, yeah, and the pressure began to build for him because one of the elders had tried to do the mentor thing, you know, the Paul to Timothy thing, and was wanting to get him to be appointed an elder, and had told him on a number of occasions, "We're going to get you there." But Sasha was not interested in that in the slightest. By this time, he was fully awake. He was just hanging in to work out how long it was going to take for me to wake up. So that's why he was just sort of enduring the situation. But he was not wanting this attention from the elders to be an elder. And he, I think, was finding it more and more difficult to see how callously they were dealing with ones in the congregation and how unkind they were. We saw ones who were struggling, who were also dealing with the same pressure we were dealing with, who were finding it hard to get to meetings, who were finding it hard to answer up, who were finding it hard to get more than 2 hours on their report card. And the elders were just harsh about them and judgmental and look, they're useless. They can't get this. No, they're not here again. And Sasha was kind of becoming an advocate and speaking up and saying, "Hey, you don't know what's going on in their lives. Why don't you go and see them and just genuinely ask how they are?"
Because
you might
judging
be surprised.
is easier.
Yeah, well, as it turns out, you're right. So this then, the elders didn't like that Sasha was questioning them. Mm-hmm. So more pressure was building. The elders were not liking this. You could start to see it in meeting parts or in answers that he would give in the watchtower. There were a few of the elders in particular that Sasha just had to put his hand up and you could see them bristle. So storm clouds were brewing, and it all erupted in January 2015 with the Circuit Overseer's visit. And to cut a long story short, basically the CEO hauled him into the back room with another elder present, and by this time Sasha was out of patience with the whole thing, and he was just, "Look, what? You've ambushed me into this meeting. What's this about? If you're going to remove me, whatever you're doing, just get it done more quickly." That was his attitude, which did not go down very well with them. And the end result was, of course, he was either Sasha stepped down or he was removed, whatever. He was no longer a servant. And the attitude change again. So you got the attitude change when you stop being a regular pioneer. Now the attitude change again with him no longer being a servant is drastic. You feel like you're out on the ledge. And now all of a sudden you're not in the clique and you're not invited to social events anymore and you're overlooked for things. It's... Fast forward a few months to June 2015, and that's when the cat well and truly came out the bag, because the young witness we had working for us had fossicked around on the work computer and had seen that Sasha was on a forum for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And that was it. As soon as she saw it, she went straight to the elders and told them. And the elders had an emergency meeting the next morning. And they didn't call us, they didn't tell us anything. How we found out was that Saturday afternoon, the following day, our employee called us up and said that she was calling to let us know that she couldn't work with us anymore. And we were perplexed. We didn't know why. And she just said, "You know why," to Sasha. Sasha didn't know what to make of that. I certainly didn't know what to make of that. Anyway, she got off the phone pretty much straight after, said she had to go, hung up, and left us. We were like, what was that? Sasha tried calling her back. She wouldn't respond. Eventually, he got on to her father, who was one of the elders, and he enlightened us as to what had happened. But did the whole, it's all trauma to them, of course. He was doing we're so upset, we're so distressed. We just, Alyssa told us that you've been looking at these websites. And then Sasha had to tell me, after he got off that phone call, he then had to tell me what this elder had said. And I learnt that my husband had been on apostate websites, and I was horrified because even though I was weak spiritually, that was huge. That was just enormous.
That's a huge mountain to climb for most people.
Yeah, and I was stunned. Now, Auntie Bev's part of this story as well, because the day we found this out, we were going into the city to spend time with Auntie Bev and a work colleague of mine. We were going to see the ice hockey, and we had this phone call on the way into that event. So by the time we got in, Sasha and I were both traumatized. Yes. And there was no hiding this. This was not something you just go, we'll talk about it later and let's just go and have a good night. There was no possibility of that. So I went in to see Auntie Bev and Donna, and I had to sit down and tell them, look, something really big's happened and we're trying to get our heads around it. And it spoilt the whole weekend. The following day, on the Sunday, when Sasha and I returned back home after seeing the hockey, we had the most agonizing day. I had to find out, and I was terrified to find out, how far did this go? It's one thing to look on websites, but I needed to understand how far his questioning went. And I'm trying to ask him, and I could see at the same time while I'm asking him, Sasha's being open to my questions. He's wanting to be truthful, but he's just as terrified as to how I'm going to respond to his answers. It was an excruciatingly painful day. And Sasha was being as honest as he could with me. He was heartbroken. He was devastated. He was distraught. And I was so distressed to see him like that, because he's such a strong, confident man. The type of person you can always go to with problems, and he'll listen to you and then help you work out a way to fix it, right? And to see him so unsure was just gut-wrenching. There were points where he was collapsed on the floor sobbing. It was just heartbreaking to see. It was really tough. But we managed to get through it together. We got through that night. We didn't attack each other at any point. We just listened to one another and tried to understand where we were both coming from. Monday proved to be really hard for me, because I then had to go into the office, and the same girl who had just resigned was also working at the practice, and I had to face her. And that was really hard because I wanted to say a few things and I couldn't. But we got through that too. And then the next weekend, we didn't go to the meeting on the Tuesday night because neither of us could. But on the Sunday, I felt we should. I think Sasha was just happy to go with whatever I felt we needed to do. So we went to the meeting, and that was the last meeting we ever attended, because the reaction from the congregation was, I don't know how you're supposed to put up with that kind of behaviour. You could tell in every look, in every glance, in all of the body language, they knew what was going on. The gossip mill had worked itself over time.
Oh, yeah.
This was juicy. This was sensational.
Yeah, that's a huge scandal.
Yeah. And they were all over it. And so it was just so you could feel it. And then you had this elder that hung around from the moment we arrived until the meeting started. Then he went and sat with his family. And then he was back straight after. He was like a police dog, making sure that Sasha had no interaction with anybody else in the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
That same elder had tried calling me during the week at work, trying to get information from me on Sasha, which I did not feel comfortable with, and I told Sasha about it as soon as I got home. It was such a hard time. After that, though, Sasha and I kind of mutually agreed we didn't like that, and the weeks just started to go by. We didn't go to the meetings. The Sundays, Sasha conveniently made something else more enjoyable. Let's go for a drive. Let's go down, do some shopping here.
Let's have a root canal.
Yeah. Yes, that would be a lot more comfortable. Yeah. Just anything else. And time started to go by. And as time started to go by, the silence from the congregation became louder. And I started to think, hang on a minute. It's one thing, you knew what was going on with Sasha, but no one's spoken to me here at all. Right. That's how important I am.
Yeah. What did you do?
I hadn't done anything.
You're only a woman.
Yes.
Well, that's true. Being a woman isn't a good thing in the organization, but if they're truly shepherds, they should be concerned about their sheep who now they think is married to a wolf. I mean, they should have been all over you trying to help you out. But like you said, it seems like they were nowhere to be found, and that's typical.
No. And I knew that the only way to get any of their attention was to walk into a kingdom hall. I would have to make the first move. There was not going to be anyone making the first move to me. I had to do it. And I just thought, no, I'm not interested in doing that. I'm not going to put up with that kind of behavior. That's just, forget it. So we didn't go back to meetings. Now, while that was the case, I can still honestly say that I still believed. Hey, there's a huge difference between not going to meetings because craps happened and then realizing that the religion you've been raised in was a complete lie and sham. That hadn't happened for me yet. And Sasha, bless his cotton socks, he let me discover that for myself. I think he knew that you've got to be in control of that. You've got to work through that yourself. You can't have someone else show you. You have to have the courage to do it yourself. I didn't yet have that courage. So this is now towards the end of 2015. The regional convention comes along, and Sasha and I had some little discussion about whether we'd attend. We both went not really wanting to, so we just didn't. And then the next big test was March 2016, the memorial. And we both discussed that to a degree, and in the weeks prior, I had a few conflicting thoughts and feelings about it. But again, I just thought, you know what? I don't think I want to go. I actually think I'm going to be more uncomfortable going than being uncomfortable not going. So we didn't go. But I still believed. It wasn't until November 2016, in fact, the 30th of November 2016, that it all just fell apart for me. And that was when the findings report from the Australian Royal Commission, it was released on the 28th of November, and I was down in Melbourne on the 30th for a work conference, just a one-day thing. So I was at the airport in Melbourne after this conference, and it was going to be an early flight, and then I was going to go to work straight afterwards. But the flight was delayed by about an hour. And so I texted Sasha just to let him know her flight's delayed. And he sends back a text and goes, oh, well, you could read the ARC report to pass the time. And I texted him back and went, that will just piss me off. And he just replied something funny. I can't even remember what he said, but the seed was there. Right, and I'm sitting there. I've got an hour now of time. And I'm like, well, why don't I just have a look at it? So I've got my phone and I Google the Australian Royal Commission and put Jehovah's Witnesses into the search field and wow, there it is. And I started reading. And it literally was like time stood still. Everything just stood still. It was just incredible. I was in a crowded terminal and I felt my heart get ripped right out of me. It was just so shocking. Reading the testimonies of BCB and BCG, I was horrified, absolutely horrified. But the manner in which they wrote the report, it was so clinical. It was so emotionally detached. It was legalese. It was just presenting fact, which made it so credible. It was just undeniable what had happened. And as I read every word, I knew what I was reading was true.
Did it have the testimony in there as well from the brother? So was it the whole thing?
It was 110 pages.
Gotcha.
And it had everything. It wasn't a transcript. It wasn't the transcripts.
Oh, okay.
What it was the conclusions.
The conclusions, okay.
Of what they had found during case study 29. So it didn't go into all of the graphic detail. It went into enough.
Yeah.
But it summarized all of the findings and it went through what their recommendations were at the end, what their conclusions were, the gross negligence of the organisation, their failure to understand what child sex abuse is, their ignorance, their arrogance, everything was, but it was worded brilliantly. Yeah. I could not stop reading it. I sat there in that crowded terminal, this phone just stuck in my hand. I could not, thank you. I couldn't stop reading it. I remember finally the boarding call came for the flight and I waited till just about the last passenger. I still had this phone in front of me. I read it as I boarded the plane. I read it through takeoff, through the flight, through landing. I read it while I stood at the baggage terminal waiting for my bag. I read it when I got the taxi to work. And by the time I got to work, I was in so much turmoil. I don't know actually how I got through the workday. And I got home to Sasha and he didn't know I'd read the report until I got home. And when I got home, I just said to him, it's not the truth. It's not the truth. It cannot be. It's just not. And he was all of the support I needed. And I'm so lucky. I realize how lucky I am because so many witnesses that wake up don't have that. Yeah,
that's a terrifying position to be in, to be that alone.
To be by yourself coming to that knowledge.
Yeah.
I can't fathom what I was just so lucky to have the support that I did. He was just tremendous. But even then, he didn't, Sonia, you realise it's not the truth. I'm now going to tell you everything. Yeah. He still withheld knowledge. He still was patient with me. And so he let me just go through all of the horror that I needed to. That weekend, I watched all of the videos of the ARC back to back. Saw Jeffrey Jackson's hideous attempt at a testimony. And what brought it home to me even more was that I knew these people. I knew Doug Jackson. I had met Terry O'Brien. I had met Rodney Spinks. I'd met Vintoul several times. I knew a lot of these people who were giving appalling testimonies. Doug Jackson I knew really well because way back when I was in Scarborough as that young little pioneer, he was the first circuit overseer. He and his wife had spent 3 years, the 3 years that I was in Scarborough, and we were close. And he said those despicable things in that testimony. He wrote that letter where he said that Bill Neal could be reappointed as an elder once it had all died down. The depth of my horror, I could not articulate. It was just hideous. And then I realised that I'd met Bill Neal and that I knew the family and that I had probably met at some point, I'd bumped into BCB, which just made it even more horrific. It just, it changed my life reading that report.
You alluded earlier to a situation that you were aware of in your congregation where you and Sasha supported a family. Yeah. And was there, it sounds like, I mean, just from what you have talked about that a little bit, off mic when we've been talking, was the fact that you knew that situation and now you're watching the Australian Royal Commission on Child Abuse and you're seeing, wait, it wasn't just that family and it wasn't just that one time in a congregation and then some sort of anomaly, but now you're seeing that systematically this has been a thing and that the people that are entrusted at the top, the people who are working at the branch and such are giving such garbage answers and skirting the questions. I would have to imagine that it was, being able to call back to that time and that family. Was that something that really helped you to see that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There was definitely a link with that. I mean, we got to know that family quite intimately and still do. Yes, we were putting all of the dots together. And it wasn't just that family we knew. We knew of another case as well. We were seeing Pandora's box open here and realizing the horror of the situation. And for me, I think this issue, the child sex abuse issue, was always going to be the trigger. Because I can remember when I first started pioneering, this was 91. This was just when the lid was being lifted off the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And the horror of what we heard then of priests just being moved from one parish to another so that they could, and everyone was horrified. The public were horrified. Everyone's horrified. But for a 16-year-old pioneer going from door to door, speaking to people who had said, no, I've lost my faith. I used to be Catholic. I can't stand religion anymore because of this. And I had no comeback because, hey, I can't blame you for that. But I'd walk away from that door and think, Satan, you horrible person, you've turned these people away from Jehovah. And I also turned from those doors thinking, that will never happen with Jehovah's Witnesses because we have the truth. So the sense of betrayal that I felt, and that I can't even begin to scratch the surface of the betrayal that actual survivors have felt.
Right.
I feel enormously for them. My heart goes out to them that they've had to endure such atrocities, to not be believed. I take it as a source of pride now that is the line that I go, no, I don't care how I've lived my life before or what pride I took in being a witness. You don't get to excuse that. You just don't. You've got to look at that kind of ugliness in the face. Because those victims, those survivors need to be heard and they need to be understood and they need to know that it's not acceptable. And so my call out to them is it's not acceptable and I won't accept it and I will leave a religion over it. I don't care what the costs are. You can shun me. You can do whatever you want to me. You can call me names. You can say lies about me. I don't care what you do to me. For the sake of those victims and those survivors, I leave whatever it is.
So in the Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, they like to talk about how essentially, it's been so long since I've read the scriptures, but So essentially, if you don't call out a person for their sin, then you're a sharer in their sin.
Yes.
And you have 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses that know these things now. Now, maybe not every individual, but aren't they tacitly condoning this and supporting it by continuing to support the organization and by making excuses for the organization? Well, we just didn't know what it was like back then. Well, you know what? You claim to be God-led. So why is God always behind? Why didn't God warn you about this before instead of, afterward? Now, after the world at large finds out that, these sexual predators, there's so much more to them. Why is it that it takes the world at large to figure this out? If you're led by God, why didn't God tell you?
Yep.
Why did God let all these kids be hurt?
Yep.
And you can't claim that you've got. So God can prophesy the fall of Babylon the Great, or he can have prophecies for all these things, but he can't protect children. And then if you read in the Bible, something that really bothered me about this whole situation and the whole, everything that happens to these kids. If you look in the scriptures, there are commands and scriptures about bestiality. There are, you shouldn't commit bestiality. You should, man shouldn't lie with man. You shouldn't have sex out of marriage. But where is the scripture that says that you can't sexually abuse children? There's nothing in the Bible that protects the most vulnerable human beings on the planet.
Yep.
It is never mentioned. And it goes as far as to specifically mention animals and things like that, and just ridiculous things in the Mosaic law as far as where seed can be spilled and all, just these horrible things, but nothing about kids. And so I think that these situations, when they arise, it's easy for Jehovah's Witnesses to try to write it off as we didn't know or make all these excuses, but they're condoning something that if they knew that a brother or sister in the congregation was doing such a thing or was cheating on their spouse or whatever, and they didn't speak up and tell the elders, then they would be seen as blood guilty and they would be seen as a sharer in the sin. And yet they are all watching these kids be abused and no one is doing anything. And they're coming up with excuse after poor excuse and yet claiming to have the one and only truth, to be the only true Christians on earth, and that, Jehovah God is supporting them. And if he is, then his hand's pretty short, isn't it? He can't really reach very far. He's a pretty powerless God. So did this, so obviously this shook you regarding the organization. Did it shake you regarding your faith, period, in God or the Bible, or did it start you down a path? I'm just wondering, where that led as far as taking the beliefs apart.
Well, that was certainly the first Jenga brick to come out to make it all topple.
Right.
Later on, I think, so that was the 30th of November. End of December, we were actually going up on a trip to Hamilton Island with Auntie Bev. And it was actually great. The timing was perfect because I started to ask Sasha a few more questions and he started to share with me in a way that I felt safe. He showed me JW Facts and he just left me with it to just read it. And I started to come across a few things on JW Facts that really started to make a big impact. Paul wrote a great article on misleading quotes and lies. Oh, that one rocked my world a few degrees because, especially having pioneered so long, where I just relied on everything that came out of Watchtower as being true and accurate. And then I found out, oh, no, they've just been using quotes in a way to make it look like the point they're trying to get across. When you actually compare the quote back to back, you find that it does not, it had no intention of being applied the way that Watchtower applied it. And the out and out lies that were put into material. And with the way Paul wrote that article, he just did a back-to-back comparison. There was no interpretation of it. He wasn't trying to build a case of, look, they're lying. He didn't make any accusations. He just laid out the evidence, and the evidence speaks for itself. That really rocked me. And over the months to come, Sasha would just show me, oh, maybe you might like this article, you might like that article, but he left me to sort of find it out for myself. And I suppose, so in a weird sense, I had the joy of working it out for myself, if that's not really the right word, the horror of finding it out for myself. And the things that rocked my world was, of course, the big ones, 607 BCE. Finding out that was not the date that Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. In fact, that one I had to go to the New South Wales State Library over. And I dragged Sasha along. And
serves him right.
On 2 occasions. Actually, it was a great little experiment. The answer was already clear in the index, right? Because you're searching in the index for anything on 607, and crickets coming back at you. There's nothing coming back. So then you search for destruction of Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar, and 587 keeps coming back. The whole day was nothing to be found. Nothing remarkable happened in 607 BCE, let alone Jerusalem being destroyed. There's nothing there. So 1914 then folds under that one. Everything was just falling apart like a house of cards. And at the same time as that, because I was now turning over the stones of every little cherished belief that I'd had, how could I not then have the courage to turn over the big ones? The Bible, God, Christ. I had to look under those as well. And now I was looking at it from a different point of view. I wasn't looking at it as the believer that believes without question. I was now looking at it as the skeptic, as I've had some really big beliefs shaken and I've seen they're not true. So now prove to me they are true. And I couldn't find evidence for those either. Looking at the Bible, as you just said, why are there not things to protect children? And I began to realize that the Bible was written by men with the best of the knowledge that they had at the time. There wasn't anything divine about it, because if it was divine, well, I expect better. I expect a book to not condone slavery. I expect a book that treats humans better.
Particularly women and children.
Well, yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah.
And I began to realize, I started to listen to different podcasts, because I was trying to, you can get lost in this whirlwind when you start uncovering it. Becomes obsessive, and it doesn't feel good inside, because everything gets turned upside down. And I was angry. I was really angry. I was upset. I was distressed, because I felt like, and I'd been lied to. I felt used and manipulated, and I felt foolish, because how could I have been so stupid to have believed these things so sincerely? And now, who am I? And what do I believe? And yeah, but it takes a while to sort that out, right? You've got to work that out for yourself all over again. And what do I believe? And what is my identity? Because if you'd asked me when I was 19, who was I? Very first thing I tell you is I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses. That was who I was. That was my identity. Now, that's not me anymore. So who am I? And I felt like I literally had to go back to the drawing board, pick up the pieces of the Jenga puzzle again, and try to rebuild it somehow.
There's a book by Eckhart Tolle called A New Earth, and in it he talks about the ego. And I remember that when we were reading it before we were actually out, I remember in there it talks about the ego identifies with certain things. So the ego identifies with being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. But, one thing that we all, after we leave, we're all trying to find ourselves, right? But there is a core self that was there before all these labels were put on it, before all these expectations or these experiences were put on it. There is us at the core. And that has never changed. Other things have been added to it, but we can still be this. We're still the same person at our base. And that has been something I've tried to remember, because I've always been there. It was just covered up with the layers of garbage that were piled on top of it. But once you clear all that away, you're still there. And it's a freer and lighter place to be when you don't have all that stuff laid on top of you. You're not carrying that around all the time. And, but it just goes to show how ego-driven something like being one of Jehovah's Witnesses is. It's your identity. It's who you are. It's how you think. It's how you act. And it's all about appearances and things like that. And, all those things really have no substance because you can strip all that away and you're still there. Yeah. So, what a waste to put all that on. And, it does. It's not fun to look back and see that you carried all that for all those years. And you're not alone. I've talked about feeling pranked as well, almost like somebody played a trick on you for decades. It's easy to reason away from it and to say, well, obviously I was up against something bigger than me, or I was raised in it and all that. But emotionally, you still have to deal with it.
That's right.
And it takes a while for your emotions to catch up to your head. And I think that's something that's the struggle everybody goes through when they leave, is even once they start learning things intellectually, trying to get your feelings to match up when they've been driven a certain way your whole life. That's the hard part.
Yeah. And you feel such an enormous sense of loss.
Yes, absolutely.
That because as all of that crumbles away, you begin to realize that the other beliefs aren't true as well, such as the resurrection hope.
Yes.
So you go through a re-grieving process, or perhaps more appropriately to say you grieve for the first time.
Yes.
Because you weren't able to grieve if you'd lost someone, not in the way that a human should be able to do in a healthy way.
No, because you have to show everybody else that you have the hope.
Right, that's right. So, yeah, you grieve over the resurrection hope. You grieve over the ones you've lost. You grieve over, I'm not going to live forever now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have this utopia. And you actually look at the utopia from a different point of view and realize it's actually dystopia. It wasn't actually a healthy thing anyway. So you analyze all of that, and then you realize, hey, I'm 42 and I've lost so much of my life in this religion. I've lost so many opportunities, and you've got to get your head around that as well. And good thing, again, as I say, I'm an optimist, so I was able to sort of bounce that around and go, okay, all right, you've lost some time, but you still have a lot of time ahead of you to make as much difference as you can and to no longer be defined by that. I did go and seek counselling because I just had so many emotions trying to deal with that. I had about 6 sessions with her, and she'd asked me a question, I think in the second session, that I really grappled with. She asked me to find me something positive about being raised as a witness. And at that time, I was so full of anger, I could not think of anything positive. She tried to come up with something positive. She said, well, you were raised to have a moral code. And I would say, right. And that moral code teaches people to hate homosexuals and to be prejudiced about anyone who's not a Jehovah's Witness, and that they should die in Armageddon. Yeah, that moral code's really healthy. Yes, sarcasm was a very useful part. And then well, you were a full-time volunteer helping other people. I mean, yes, but you can only do that as volunteer work. And when you look at that as volunteer work, that's so that you can teach other people about your false religion. You're not allowed to do any useful kinds of volunteering, because why would you invest yourself into a world that's dying? You're not going to do that. So no, that is not a healthy thing either. Every attempt she made. It took me a while to work it out. It took me about 12 months to try to find something positive about being raised as a witness. And I have to say that if I had not had the experience, I wouldn't be who I am today, and I wouldn't be able to have the opportunity. I hope I have the opportunity to help as many people as I can. If I can help others, be a support for them, a comfort for them, a listening ear for them, I don't think I would have the capacity to do that if I had not been raised in a religion like that.
Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier the word empathy. Has made you an empathetic person. And I think that if you live a life where you're kept away from problems, you can't see how other people have it. But once you've had something like this happen, you can start to look at other people and say, well, everybody thought I was fine. I wonder what's behind the mask of this person.
Yeah.
Because we all wore masks. So you start seeing things deeper, and I completely agree that is one thing here too, with myself, to be able to develop that empathy. I would say I'm glad you actually brought that up. Funny timing. I'm in a coaching program, and I was asked what is something that would be positive, and I have not been able to come up with anything. And I do think that just going through, unfortunately, sometimes it takes going through something awful to help us to be able to see what other people might be going through, to see that there might be more beneath the surface. And I think that's a really beautiful point that you made. That actually helps me too. So,
oh, good.
Thank you.
Wow, I helped Mike.
Well, I'm sure you'll help a lot of people with this. I mean, I think that this is a really interesting. Oh, go ahead, Beverley.
Just like to say.
Oh no, you're going to cry.
I'm so pleased that Sherrie, Sasha, my darling sister Lola, are out of it. It's the first time in 40 years we can have Christmas together.
Yeah, this year,
I've
right?
waited 40 bloody years for that bastard to get out.
You gotta buy some presents.
Wacko bloody time. And Scott, my nephew, and Sherry's cousin is going to join us as well. So I'm thrilled to the back teeth.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Love it.
Just on that, you said to it, you alluded to it earlier. We don't realise when we're in this religion what we are costing our family. It has brought Auntie Bev and I closer together, and now having my mum's now woken up as well after 46 years as a witness, and she's now celebrating her birthday for the first. We had Mother's Day together for the first time this year. I'm buying her a Christmas present, and we're getting to share in these things that we never had to before, but the impact that it has on our family that were never witnesses, that had to sit on the sidelines and watch us be involved. I don't think we realise that we're not the only victims here.
Yeah, the victimhood, it's a domino effect.
Yes.
So many people are impacted by it.
And another thing that I could never ever enter the doorstep of that Kingdom Hall again. I was in the car with my niece, and she wanted to listen on the Sunday morning to, what do you call it?
She wanted to dial into it.
Want to dial into the meeting. I said, yeah, no problem at all, darling, that's fine. Now, the first person got up and said, if you rearrange the words of Santa, it says it's Satan. I absolutely blew my top, because to me, I still believe in Santa. I love Christmas. I have a wonderful time. Turn that bloody thing off, and I cannot listen to it ever again. Thank you very much.
Yeah, they really like to be judgmental in the things that they say, and they have no problem taking apart. It's funny, they have no problems taking apart the beliefs or the joy or whatever of someone else. They sit in judgment of the entire world, but don't dare ever criticize them. It's the epitome of a narcissist that sits on high and tells everybody else how horrible they are, but the second that you shine a mirror on them or shine a light on them, all of a sudden they're being attacked and you're a horrible person for attacking them, and they're poor persecuted them. And you see it's like the embodiment of that one quality in an entire organization.
Well, I'm only glad that I was in the car and not at the service.
Oh, could you
because
imagine?
I think I would have got up, I would have punched him one.
Well, I wish somebody put it on YouTube. All right, so ultimately then, what was the stand that you took? Did you disassociate?
I really wanted to disassociate because
Oh, that's right.
When I first reading the ARC report, I wanted to literally disassociate myself from the organisation. I did not want to be seen to condone it at all, and I wanted to have no affiliation with that organisation at all. At the time, though, family circumstances were different, and Sasha made some really good points because I spoke to him about it, and he said, don't play their game. Their words that they use, and it's their rules. You don't have to play by them. You are disassociated by the fact that you don't go anymore. You don't have to put in a letter. To be honest, I still struggle with that. There's a part of me that still wants to do that wants it to be formal and legitimized, that I want them to know the level of horror I feel and that I want nothing to do with them. I haven't done it yet. Maybe time will change. Maybe I still will. At the time when I first thought about it, I was the sole carer for my father, and he remains a devoted, believing witness. But he was quite sick. I was the one living closest to him. I had enduring guardianship and power of attorney and took him to all of his doctor's appointments, etc. So I knew that if I disassociated, I would be making that impossible to care for him. Mm-hmm. So I didn't do it at that stage. Things have now changed as far as my relationship with my father is concerned. Earlier this year in September, my husband and I had an interview with Lloyd Evans, and just before that, because I was concerned what the impact would be of that if Dad heard it. So in the weeks leading up, my language started to change a bit with Dad. He would make comments about, one day you'll come back. He was hopeful that one day I would return. He thought I was just disillusioned and discouraged because of what the organisation had done as far as child abuse was concerned. But Jehovah will fix it in time, was his attitude.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah. But I started to say to him, Dad, I'm not coming back. You can't know the things I know and come back. It's not possible. You can't unsee what I've researched, and I've researched a lot. And over those weeks, we started to have a few more conversations, and I delicately, as gently as I could, started to explain to Dad where I stood, that I no longer believe in the Bible and that I don't believe there is a God. And these were horrific things for him to hear. I know, I understand that. I heard it from my husband.
Yeah.
Right? I've been there. But I needed to be honest with him, and I said to him, I don't want to be deceitful to you. I don't want to be portraying myself in a way that gives you hope. There isn't hope. I'm not returning. But I'm still your daughter, and I'm still happy to look after you. He couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. He wrote me a card actually just before the card happened, we'd gone to see him on a Sunday. Oh, yes. We'd bought him an iPad so that he could watch JW Broadcasting. And we'd set it all up for him, showed him how to use it. The iPad needed an update. He had no idea how to do it. It needed a Wi-Fi connection, yada, yada, yada. We sorted that out. We brought it back to him on the Sunday. And on that Sunday, Dad asked us some questions. He wanted to understand a bit more where I stood, and he wanted to know where Sasha stood. I have to say the conversation went well. It was hard for him, and he arced up at a few things. Like, if you'd listened to it, there were so many points where he obviously had cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
It just wasn't adding up to him. He was finding it very hard. Sasha and I were quite gentle in how we explained it to him. Except, it was funny what the triggers are. When he asked about the flood, and he asked us if we believed it had happened, and Sasha said, no, there isn't evidence. That actually got him really upset. Can't handle that. He could not handle that we did not believe in the flood.
Wow. And
I
that's
know.
one of the easiest things to destroy.
No, but you know what he used as an explanation? But the ice caps are where all the water is from the flood. That's evidence that there was a flood. So, look. Anyway.
So, in other words, if you can find one thing that you could conceivably somehow spin into proof,
Yep.
then that's all you need.
Yep.
That's all you need. Even though, I mean, hasn't it been proven that all the water on Earth, including the
Still
ice
wouldn't
caps,
cover
would
it.
not cover the...
Yep.
Yeah.
But Dad's an uneducated man. I'm not saying he's stupid. He's not stupid. He tries...
And he needs his beliefs.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually the core of it. He needs to believe. But what added to the conversation that day was the watchtower that had been studied on that Sunday. And it was about, I can't remember the title of it now, but it was basically about loyalty to Jehovah. And there was a paragraph that he handed me to read. And basically the paragraph was on what type of associates you choose. Are they associates that help you to build your relationship with Jehovah? And if they're not associates that do that, should you be spending time with them? He used that paragraph and said to me, I have to consider my relationship with you. And Sasha said to him, he made it very clear to him, he said, if you cut Sherrie off, all of our support stops because I won't see Sherrie abused. And Dad said, I know that would happen. He says, I just need to give it some thought. So we left that day knowing, I mean, he'd backed himself into a corner with that kind of reasoning that Watchtower puts out. I couldn't see how he could perform the mental gymnastics to somehow keep a relationship with his now atheist daughter. And the week hadn't passed before I received a card from him saying he would have to cut the relationship with me because he felt that having a relationship with his daughter would be an act of disloyalty to Jehovah.
It's terrible, isn't it, to think that they do that?
Yeah, and of course, what they're conflating is Jehovah with the organization.
That's right.
You know, even if so, because the honest truth is, yeah, you're an atheist. But if you weren't an atheist and you still believed in God, even called him Jehovah, if you weren't one of Jehovah's Witnesses, the answer's still the same. So it really has nothing to do with belief in even in God. It's belief in that specific organization, and that's it. He keep the iPad?
Oh, yes.
Of course.
Yes. Well, believe me, we did... when we first got the card, we were kind of, that's it, we're taking everything back. You know, an emotive response.
Sure, and I understand that.
You know, but...
I mean, it's a pretty big betrayal on his part. I mean, even though you can excuse it away with the reasoning behind why he would be that way, but emotionally, it still feels like a pretty big betrayal. Yeah. So you're going to react that way.
Yeah. So we went and saw him the week after. I had worked out what I needed to do for the legal side of things because as the attorney and the guardian, I can't change the documents. That has to come from him legally. I went and sought legal advice to find out what, if anything, I could do. And the lawyer had said, no, he has to change them. If he no longer wants you as power of attorney and enduring guardian, he's going to have to change that. And because I was the one that made all those documents happen in the first place, I knew what the likelihood was of him actually doing that. So I thought,
Right.
I can see what's going to happen here if I don't do something. Something will happen, he'll end up in hospital, and I'll still be dragged into it.
Yeah.
So I then asked the lawyer, well, if I write letters to each of the entities and explain that his wishes have changed, and I ask them to remove my contact details until such time as he gives new instructions, would that be appropriate? And he said yes. So that's what I did. I took a day off work, and it took me 4 hours to do. I had to write all these letters, and I wrote one letter to Dad outlining everything I had done and basically giving him a handover of where everything was up to, where his appointments were up to, where his bills were up to, where all the legal matters were up to, the ones that I couldn't change instructions with that he needed to follow up on. I explained everything.
You're nicer than me.
I maybe so, but you know, I wanted to conduct myself in a way that they couldn't turn around and say, you're the nasty apostate, just you're the stereotypical nasty bitter. I wanted to conduct myself in a way that was still honourable.
No, and I understand that, but they're going to say that anyway. So.
Yes, although it had an interesting twist.
Really?
Yes, because the day before we were going to meet him, and I asked Sasha to call him because I thought, I'm not contacting you now. You send me a card like that.
Yeah.
So I asked Sasha, can you call him, tell him we'll come Friday afternoon at 2:00, and Dad agreed, said that was fine. But he called back a few hours later and said, can we make it 3? And Sasha called me and told me, and I went, there'll be an elder there. Know it. There will be an elder there. There is no reason for him to change the time without that happening. And sure enough, there was an elder there. But it actually backfired on Dad because the elder that Dad asked to come also happened to be Dad's landlord. So I've had a bit to do with him in discharging my responsibilities as power of attorney. And anyway, when I turned up and I saw Don, I was like, oh, Don, I didn't know you'd be here. He was horrified. He said, didn't your father tell you I'd be here? I said, no. He said, I told him to call you and tell you. So Dad hadn't actually filled him in on the story as to why he was actually there. Don didn't know what he was about to see. So anyway, it was Sasha and I were there with Dad and Don, and I had said to Dad, well, I've got everything ready for you. I've worked hard to get this done. And Dad said, oh, I know. I've been getting calls all morning. What I hadn't realised is as I did all these letters and I sent them that morning, he was getting phone calls from each of the doctors and each of the institutions to say, we've just been advised that Sherrie's no longer to be your contact. Is that correct? So he knew I was taking this seriously. I was not just going to, keep doing things for him. This was happening. So he wasn't exactly thrilled. Don just watched, he observed, he knew what his role was, but things got heated very quickly because Dad started to get very upset with me and Sasha wasn't going to have a bar of that.
Why would he be upset? He asked for this.
I know, but
It kind of sounds narcissistic, honestly.
Well, yeah, and it is. He said, Sherrie, this is going to make it really hard on me. And I said, I know it will. I know it will, because I know how much work has been involved in supporting you, but I'm honouring your wishes. Your card made it very clear that you no longer want to have anything to do with me, so I'm just doing what you've asked for. It didn't have to go this way. It got really, really ugly, to the point of Dad ordering Sasha out of the house. And interestingly, when Sasha took his leave, the elder did too.
He didn't want any part of that mess.
He wanted to get out of there, I think, as quickly as he could. But it left me behind with Dad, and I was able to say a few things that, as a daughter, I needed to say. I started this interview by saying that there'd been troubles as a child, and it wasn't the easiest childhood. And I think I'm very happy with how I conducted myself in that final meeting with Dad. Whether I ever get to speak to him again or not, I don't know. But I hold my head high in how I behaved.
Yeah.
I did me, yeah. And, I mean, he got really gnarly towards the end, and he made it sound like he was the martyr and it was happening to him.
Of course.
He was, but you've said you hate God and you hate the Bible. And I stopped him and I said, no, you don't get to do that. You don't get to put words in my mouth. I have never said those words. I have never said that. Please don't misrepresent me. And then, like a vision, I knew how things were going to go. I said to him, I know what's going to happen from this point on. You're going to stab me in the back. You're going to make me sound like the worst person ever. You're going to paint me out to be the villain. And he was shocked. He said, why do you say that? And I said, 43 years of knowing you. I've seen you do it to so many others. You're going to do it to me too. He was incensed. He said, get out. And I said to him, okay, that's fine, I'll go. I just have one final thing to say. I know what buttons to push, you see. I've watched him long enough. I just said to him, Gary, have a nice life. And because I said Gary, I used his first name. That was like that just blew him up.
Because you didn't give him the proper respect as a
Right,
parent.
yes.
Yeah, the authoritarian.
Yes, right? He blew up. How dare you call me by your first name? And I said to him, my final words, I said, you don't deserve the intimacy of Father. And I walked out the door, and they were my final words.
Very brave, Sherrie.
Good for you.
I felt it was a, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn moment.
Yeah.
That was my gone with the wind. That was my moment. But interestingly, when I walked outside, the elder was still there with Sasha. And the elder was just completely perplexed, but he's like, what card? What card? He didn't even know about the card Dad had written. Well, we had it there. We showed him. He read it and he said, well, there's no misinterpreting that. He's made it very clear. And then this elder said something that I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. He said, I don't understand why your father's cutting you off. It's fine if you have family who aren't witnesses. We've got 2 disfellowship family in our family that we still see. And I'm thinking, I bet you keep that one quiet.
Yeah, you don't bring that up in the meetings. No, not at all.
But how I was really quite shocked to hear it. But what it did tell me, this elder was not seeing us as the bad guys. He was actually quite supportive, which shocked me.
He's also worried about that rent check.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I would be too.
Yeah,
I
because it
would
doesn't
be
sound
too.
like your dad's going to have his act together, most likely.
No.
No.
I know he won't.
He needs somebody else to do it for him.
Together,
So, all right. So clearly you're out now. Do you know if there's a narrative among those that knew you as to why you left? Do you know if there's anything that's...
I know I'm not painted with the same brush as Sasha. I think I'm seen as collateral damage.
Oh, it's all being blamed on him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not long after the interview with Lloyd, I worked up the courage somehow to walk up to the cart in our local area.
Mm-hmm.
There were 2 sisters and a brother there, and I knew them, the 3 of them. And when Sasha approaches the cart, he gets completely shunned, totally ostracized. Like, they try not to engage with him at all. So I wanted to see what the response would be for me. And I walked up to them. At first, one of them, she did a double take, sort of recognized me, then, oh, and then didn't know what to do. Do I say hello? Do I talk to her? What do I do? The other sister was an elder's wife. And she just came straight up. Hi, Sherrie, how are you? We miss seeing you. And I acknowledged her, nice to see you, Jill. And when she said, we miss seeing you at the meetings, I said to her, thank you for saying that. That's nice to hear. I wouldn't know it, though, because it's been 3 years and not one person has knocked on my door or phoned me to ask how I am. And I just looked at her and said, but I get it. I know what's going on. I know what's been said. I understand. Anyway, I then said to her, I was going around the corner to get some coffee. Would you like some coffee? No, they were fine. I'm shaking like a leaf. I was so...
Right.
It wasn't easy to walk up to them. I
Sure.
was so nervous, and I was also really dismayed at my reaction of being so upset. But anyway, went, got the coffee, calmed myself down, came back around to pass them again. And she again made a comment about, we miss seeing you at the meetings and we'd love to have you back. And I said to her, Jill, I won't ever be coming back. That won't be happening. I'm much better off now. I'm really happy. I'm doing well. If I'd had my time over, there was a comment I should have made. We always think about that in reflection.
Yeah, hindsight.
Because her husband is an elder and he was there. And he made not one effort to come over to me. So in all of this, we miss you, we miss you. What I would have loved to have said was, if you really miss me, why is your husband elder there, who is the one who's in a position to provide assistance and support, not even acknowledging the fact that I'm standing here? It would seem to be that this missing is hollow.
Yeah.
But I just... Anyway, what it told me, though, I suppose to answer your question, is that I can still be spoken to.
Yeah.
Somehow. So I don't think they know, not yet, how far it's gone for me.
So what would... If you had something you could say to those people, if you could say anything that you wanted to the people that... maybe, let's say, don't shun you yet, but may eventually be put in a position where they have to or whatever, what would you say to them?
I wouldn't beat around the bush. I would just... You knew who I was. What type of witness would you have described me as? How would you have described me? What do you think could possibly happen that would change that? I want you to think about it. Think about who you knew me to be. Know that this is not just a passing fancy. This is based on evidence. This is based on fact. And I urge you to look at it too. And if you need someone to support you through it, I'll be there. I'll be there to help you. But look at me, look at my life, look at who you knew me to be, and realize it had to be something of significance to make me want nothing to do with it now.
Isn't it funny, the contrast between that? That's a wonderful point, and it makes me think of the, is it like they had a brochure entitled like Return to Jehovah or something,
Yes.
and in it they give the reasons people leave, the reasons they want people to believe that people leave. One of them is something as simple as like, hurt feelings in the congregation, discouragement or something like that. You think these people who have devoted their entire life to a thing are going to leave just because some brother or sister looked at them sideways in the Kingdom Hall? Has nothing to do with that. It's got to be a huge deal. It has to have significance.
I've been through that. I've been through the discouragement phases.
Right.
We all have, right?
And we kept going.
So it's not that.
Right. So I think that's a wonderful thing to leave them with. So now you have a new life.
Yeah.
I'll ask you first, what do you like about the new life that you currently have?
Oh, where do I start? It's wonderful. It's really, really wonderful, and it's exciting. It's I'm learning new things. I feel like a sponge all over again, soaking things up. I'm trying to break free from what I was as a pioneer. Particularly, I was judgmental and arrogant and dogmatic. I knew the truth. I was absolute in those opinions. Now I try very hard to be the opposite. I don't want to be dogmatic at all. Yes, okay, I've come to some conclusions, but I'm trying to be flexible, if that's the right word, with it. So if I can use an example, let's talk about one of the big ones, God. Right now, for me to believe in an extraordinary claim, there needs to be extraordinary evidence. I don't see that extraordinary evidence. If that extraordinary evidence comes about, then I will be happy to reevaluate my opinions and my thoughts on that then. But for me right now, I don't see it. And so that's why I'm trying not to be dogmatic and say anything in an absolute sense.
Sure.
I can't say there is no God.
Obviously, things change in life.
Yeah, things do change. But for right now, that's where I sit. I am hungry about learning more, and I'm hungry about pushing my brain to understand more. So I'm reading a lot. I'm listening a lot. I'm listening to podcasts, and I find that so exciting. Learning new things and just exploring what I once knew, like evolution, learning about evolution and understand, or trying to understand. I don't think I do understand all of it, but I'm trying to learn. I'm so excited about that. That's just fantastic. Getting to meet new people, learning to create relationships with other people without judging them, with just hearing them and seeing them for who they are. I find that so incredibly exciting and more rewarding than any of the relationships I've had before.
Absolutely.
I'm so excited about that. I think that's wonderful. It's brought a new dynamic to my life that I didn't realize I didn't have. I'm enjoying work more. The relationship that Sasha and I have now is on a completely different level. We see ourselves, each other, as equals. We discuss things. We have great conversations now. And we're not mirror copies of each other. We can have different points of view on subjects. And it's not an argument. It's not a, no, you must believe this. It's, oh, that's an interesting point of view. Why do you think that? Oh, okay. And we bandy things about. It's just, I'm really excited about where I am. I'm on this wonderful trip in the US with my fantastic aunt. We're having a ball of a time meeting all these wonderful people. There's much to be excited about. So I've used that word how many times now? I'm loving life. I'm loving life. I know I only have a short time on this earth, and I am okay with that. And I don't know why we're here. I don't think there needs to be an answer to why we're here. Just be here and enjoy it and make the most of it. Make the most of it and make the biggest impact you can on other human beings to make their lives better.
So, speaking to that, are there any dreams you have for your new life? Anything that you want to do? Any bucket list items? Or is there anything that is there anything that you want to, is there an impact that you want to make? Is there, just what are your dreams for the new life going forward?
Well, I think on this trip I'm knocking a few bucket list items off. Went to New York, seen Niagara Falls, met you guys. Not that was on the bucket list, but
Shunned podcast is
Shunned
on everybody's
podcast, bucket list. I've just been having a fantastic time opening up doors. That's been fantastic. What do I want to do? There's a lot I think I can do. I'm not sure where that's going to go for me.
Yeah.
Not
everybody has a clear sense of that. And it's very hard, I think, for us coming out to have a clear sense of what we dream to be because we were never allowed to dream.
That's true.
But I think that if you just put yourself out there and start doing new things, that new opportunities arise, and those might spark some dreams, if nothing else, over time.
I do know that one thing I want to be able to do, and I've kind of mentioned it already, is I want to be able to help others. Mm-hmm. I just don't know what form that's going to take. I do want to become more of an activist. I do want to shout from the rooftops that what Watchtower does is wrong and it needs to change. I'm not an activist to want to shut them all down, because I think that is imposing on the human rights of others. If they want to believe all of that, that's their choice. They're free to believe what they want. But where those beliefs then impose on other people's human rights, that is wrong. And that needs to change. What my role is in that yet, I don't know. But I do know I want to have a part of it. So I suppose I'm keeping my options open, and I'm just looking for ways that I can be a voice somewhere. I just don't know what form that's going to take yet.
That's beautiful, and I think that we should send this out by asking Beverley a question. So, Beverley, what is it that Or how do you feel about Sherrie leaving the cult, and Sasha? How do you feel about them being out of the cult, and what do you hope for them, going forward?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, now they're living. They're living the life they should have been living all the time. They've been through a lot of trauma, but they're coming out very nicely, or they're awaking. Is that the word? Awaking?
Yeah, waking up.
They're waking up, and I'm so happy. I'm really pleased. And I'm sure my mother would have been more than happy, and also my husband. He'd have been thrilled. Because one day at work, tell him what he said, Sherrie.
That's a funny story to finish on. So my uncle was a very intelligent man, really intelligent, was an engineer, very creative, could design things. He was an atheist. Not one that you could really talk about religious topics with. He had no time for religion at all. But he was respectful. So there was one particular day I was looking very pale, as women once a month can be inclined to look. And this didn't go unnoticed by Uncle Ray. He took one look at me and he went, "Sherrie, you look very pale. You need a blood transfusion." And then just as the words got out of his mouth, he realised what he had said and to whom he had said it. And this look of horror went over his face. And he ran out that room. So I think that if I was to see him now and tell him, "Hey, Uncle Ray, I got no problem with a blood transfusion now. There's no issue with saving my life by a medical procedure if the doctors deem it necessary," I would love to have been able to have that conversation with him and many others about creation and evolution. He was a wonderful man.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to end it.
Yeah.
We'll end it on that note, and I appreciate you guys doing this.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I want to thank both Sherrie and Beverley for being so open about their lives and all that they went through. It's really interesting to get to have Beverley present for the interview because, as we talked about, this whole cult experience reaches far beyond just those of us who were directly exposed to it all. We had people that cared about us that had to sit back and watch all this go down, and they were impacted too. So my wife, Jenny, and I, we had such a great time with those two. It was just an awesome experience to have them agree to take time out of this amazing trip that they were on to visit us. They're going to places like New York City and Niagara Falls and beautiful ski slopes in Colorado and San Francisco and Hawaii. And then they stopped in the Louisville, Kentucky area to see us. So one of these things is not like the others. So it was just really cool that they made time to come see us. And then we actually got to do this interview. And just as an aside, just saying, but some of you slackers say that you want to be interviewed, but I don't see you making the trip here. If you want to get on and want to get fast tracked, flying thousands of miles to my door might be one way to get on the show. I'm just saying. So just keep that in mind. If you'd actually like to send a message of support to Sherrie or Beverley, or, one or both of them, you can do so by going to shunnedpodcast.com, where you can leave a comment for them. You can also find the resources that were mentioned in the episode there, the video for the song that she chose to represent her journey. Sherrie actually chose the song Back Down by Bob Moses to represent her journey. The song talks about making a stand for a brighter future and never going back. And I think that's something all of us can find ourselves relating to on this side of the cult. That's not the only place that you can comment on the episode. We also have a Facebook group called Shunned Podcast, where we have people discussing episodes and their own lives. And I try to do things to encourage members to find good things in life and to grow. As I stated earlier, I was going to give you some highlights of the past few weeks and give you some idea of what's going on in there. Every Wednesday, we post things that we're happy about in life this week. Every weekend, we post things that we're doing for ourselves as part of self-care, something that we were never really taught to do as witnesses or in any of these cults that we deal with. I did our first show and tell Sunday, where people posted pictures and talked about some of the things that they had that were cool or that meant something to them. Being shunned, we don't have people with us anymore that maybe we used to share that cool gadget we got with, or that sentimental item, or material things. While not being materialistic, material things do have meaning to us, a lot of times, and that's why we find these things that represent something about us. And we used to maybe share those things with our families, and we can't anymore. So, I'm taking a little time here and there, and we'll share some of those things in the group and kind of, get to know each other through that. This month, we've had at least one person disassociate and leave the cult behind, and that is awesome. We also celebrated Christmas together and New Year's. So things are happening in there. My goal is to keep it more about us as individuals and our stories, and supporting each other personally, than just keeping up with the latest J-Dub stuff. And so I also told you that I had special audio from the group that I'm going to share. So I'm going to go ahead and share that now. One of the members had what is definitely at least one of the best, if not the best, first Christmas story I've ever heard. He had posted it in the group. So I had him use a new feature of my website, which I'll tell you about and give you a chance to use after the audio, so that he could tell his story in his own voice. So here you go. This is Nico's first Christmas.
My name's Nico, and I am currently shunned as an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and this is the story of my very first Christmas. I was a little bit reluctant to go to a Christmas party, but once I realized that the reluctance was just a little bit of Jehovah's Witness left in me, I decided to just go for it. Bear in mind, I haven't celebrated Christmas since I was very, very young. My family's been in the cult since I was about 7, so basically, this is my first Christmas. When I got to the party, everyone greeted me with hugs and said how happy they were that I got to share Christmas with them. And some of them knew my previous religious background, so they were even more excited to see me. The party was just amazing. Nothing flashy or over the top, just good food, good drinks, and even better people. The icing on the cake was around 5:30 p.m. One of the mothers of the children came up to me and asked me if I would like to be Santa Claus to present gifts to all the little kids who still think Santa's real. Keep in mind, in Hawaii we don't really have a Santa Claus meet and greet at the local mall like on the mainland. Apparently, Santa's reindeer don't fancy sand and sun, but it was an awesome first experience. When I was alone, I got into my costume and no one saw me. Then all the kids sang a song to summon Santa, so to speak. As I walked through the door with my big fake jolly belly and my sack full of presents and shaking jingle bells. Thank goodness I had a fake beard because I was just smiling like an overjoyed fool. As I reached into my sack and called a kid's name, I could see the anticipation building in the other kids who were eager to hear their names called next. As they came to collect the gifts, they sat with me and took a picture with Santa. It was truly amazing. The next thing that happened really caught me off guard and almost reduced me to tears. And I'm not a very emotional person, at least not on the outside. After Santa had left and I had returned, the adults started handing out presents to each other. Now, this isn't my family. In fact, I have 0 family members in Hawaii with me, so I wasn't really expecting anything. I just thought I'd go there, meet people, eat and drink, and enjoy this holiday spirit everyone seems to be so fond of. Then the girl, or young woman I should say, who dressed up as Santa's helper to help me with the names of kids I didn't know, came up to me and handed me a wrapped present. I didn't even know what to say. I struggled to muster up the words thank you, as this was totally unexpected. There were only about 30 people there at the Christmas party, and I only knew Brian, who invited me and whom I work with, as well as his mom and dad. As I sat back and gathered myself emotionally, I began to reflect on what was actually happening. These total and complete strangers showed so much love and kindness to a guy that more than 90% had never known prior to yesterday. I was just totally dumbfounded that these worldly people I was taught were so bad showed me more love than any Jehovah's Witness I'd ever met. It was then that I realized I made the right call by leaving the cult behind for good. Of course, it still hurts that I couldn't celebrate with my fleshly family. But celebrating with my coworkers' family, and by extension all of you, I have learned what true love and the joy of the holiday spirit is. So thank you all for being awesome, and thank you, Mike, for creating this group where we have a safe place to grow and share experiences. Hope you all had a Merry Christmas and an even better year. I just wanted to give a shout out to my cousin Brianna, my friend Rainey, and my mom Corey, who have helped me through the whole awakening process and have just been super supportive, and I know will be listening to this podcast. So special thanks to them, and of course to you as well for featuring this on the podcast. Take care.
Isn't that story amazing? You know, people are truly good. Not all people, obviously, but if you put yourself out there, you too can have some amazing experiences. So, how was Nico able to tell this story? Well, I have a new feature on my website, shunnedpodcast.com, where you can click on the right side of the page. I think any of the pages actually on the site, and leave me a voicemail that I can then download and use on the podcast. You record straight from the microphone on whatever device you're using, whether it's your phone, your laptop, your computer, whatever, wherever you have a microphone. And you could even test it first to see how it sounds, make sure it sounds good. So I'm going to be asking some questions in future episodes that might produce answers that I'll use on the podcast episodes. In fact, I have a question right now. We have a new year upon us. It's 2019 now, and I'd like to know, what would you like to see improve in your life this year? It could be cult related, cult fallout related, just personal stuff, whatever. You can let me know your name if you want it used, or just tell me what you're struggling with in life and where you'd like to see improvement. I'll compile them and may use them in an episode to help others see that they aren't alone in some of these struggles. We've all been through a lot. We're all just people. So your struggles will be felt by others, and they'll know that they're not alone. So go to shunnedpodcast.com, click on the tab on the right, and let me know what troubles you're having going into 2019. Where do you need help? If you haven't been to the site lately, you'll also see that I even have some Shunned swag up there now. I have merch, which is just funny for me it's just funny to me. I never thought that, the podcast would grow like this, and that, that people would want to support it like this. But I sourced some nice t-shirts and a hoodie with the Shun logo on them that look really cool. I actually went ahead and did a trial order. I've bought these things myself so that I could try them. I wanted to make sure that they were good quality, and I think they look pretty cool. So if you're interested, this is one way of supporting the show. You'll get a pretty cool shirt or hoodie out of it, and I have ideas for some others that I'll put up as I get time. You can also find the podcast on YouTube under the channel called Shunned Podcast, one word, on Instagram at Shunned Podcast, one word, and on Twitter at Shunned Podcast, again, one word. If you'd like to hear my story and great insight into how the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses works, you can do so at the podcast called This JW Life, also found at thisjwlife.com. Now, we hadn't had any new Patreon supporters for a few months, but this month some people really stepped up to the plate, and I want to be sure to thank them all by name. First names only, of course, because I don't know everybody's situations. So I want to thank Maria, Bobby Joe, Joseph, Ellen, Kathy, and Diana for stepping up. I think it's the most support I've received in a 1 month span. So, maybe, some of it was before my latest vidcast where I explained some of the big things that I'm working on for the show, for my Facebook group, for the nonprofit that I'm at least talking about starting and doing some preliminary work on, and, the coaching and support groups that I want to start. So, maybe some of that was, some of that was before I made that announcement. Maybe some of it was after the announcement and people were inspired to contribute then. But I really want to take the time to thank everybody that really helps me make this show possible by supporting it financially. It's not just this show. The show takes a lot of work, a lot of time. There are costs involved in getting things done. But also I spend a great deal of time helping people through emails, through my Facebook group, through other social media. I get people who are asking me questions, people who need my time, and I enjoy helping. But having this support allows me to help even more. It's allowed me to take more time. And as you know from that vidcast, I've actually already stepped back from some of my cleaning work so that I can make more time for some of these things. So your support helps me be able to do this. And I can't thank you enough, because you're not only allowing me to help other people, but you're allowing me to do something that I love, that I'm really enjoying doing. It takes for me too, emotionally and mentally at times, but in the end, it's so encouraging to see people that want to support what I'm doing here, and to see people get help. So if you want to contribute in that way, you can do so at patreon.com/shunned. And, for as little as $1 a month, it really is encouraging to me and helps me to do more of this. Another great way to support both the Shunned podcast and this JW Life, if you're so inclined, it doesn't cost you a penny. Just head over to iTunes, leave a 5-star review. That helps both podcasts to get found in the searches on there so that more people can find it. Now, next month, I'm pretty excited about this one as well. We've got a really cool story. It's a former member of Jehovah's Witnesses named Silvers, and there's just some really unique aspects of his story. Homeless at 13, married at 16, everything from the blood issue to physical and sexual abuse. Silvers experienced a whole awful buffet of cult toxicity, but he's here to tell his story, which is a huge step in and of itself. It takes a lot for somebody to do that. I'm not going to spoil it all here, but this guy has been through so much, and I even have a really heartfelt and amazing update of sorts that I'll share after the interview. That's just really beautiful. So we're going to go ahead and close this episode out with the song No Hell Yet by Fair Voyeur. You can find a link to her song, to the Patreon page, to the show, to resources that were mentioned, and more, not just on the website, but if you're listening on a podcast app, you can probably get it all in the app by looking at the description. So as we end all episodes, love others, do no harm, and go be happy.
We'll curse God